Bienvenidos y bienvenidas a este webinar de la Semana de Sensibilización
Good
sobre la
morning.
Sal
Welcome to
2026.
this
Hablaré
seminar
primero en español y después
for
en
Salt
inglés. En
Awareness
la
Week.
parte
I'm first
inferior de la
going to talk
pantalla
in Spanish and then in
encontrarán
English.
un icono en
At the
forma
bottom
de
of your
globo
screen, you will find
donde
a
pueden
globe
elegir la
icon that you
interpretación para el
can
idioma de su
click to
preferencia. Tenemos
choose the language
interpretación
of
en
your preference
inglés y
because
en
we have
español. Y también en la parte inferior
interpretation
de la pantalla
services into
encontrarán
English
la
and
cajita
Spanish.
para hacer preguntas y
And you will
respuestas
also
identificada con
find
letras
at the
Q
bottom
y
of the
A.
screen the
Ahí
box to ask
pueden hacer sus
questions.
preguntas para los expositores de
You
esta
can
semana.
ask your questions
Good
there
morning to you
for
all,
this
and
morning's
thank you for
speakers.
participating in this Salt Awareness Week webinar 2026, and welcome. In the lower part of your screen, you'll find an icon with the form of a globe where you can select the language of your preference. So we have interpretation in English and Spanish. In the part below as well, you can find the Q&A box where you can do your questions for the speakers and panelists for today's webinar. And with that being said, I pass the word to Vanessa Garcia Larson. She's the Chief of the Risk Factors and Nutrition Unit of the Department of Non-Communicable Disease and Mental Health at the Pan American Health Organization, who will provide us with the opening remarks. Vanessa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luis, and hola, bon dia, good morning. Welcome everyone to the Salt Awareness Week 2026 webinar. The Pan American Health Organization is pleased to organize this activity and to join the international community and our member states to promote further policy actions to reduce salt consumption and protect the health of our population. Excessive sodium intake is associated with the highest number of diet-related deaths worldwide, an estimated 1.89 million per year. It is a well-established cause of raised blood pressure and also of increased risk of cardiovascular disease, as well as gastric cancer, obesity, osteoporosis, and kidney disease. Globally, average salt intake is estimated at 10.8 grams per day, which is more than double the WHO guidance of less than 5 grams per day of salt. And this is roughly equivalent to a teaspoon. In the Americas, salt intake was about 9 grams of salt per day in 2019, and our region is, of course, not on track to achieve the global target of a 30% reduction in sodium intake by 2025. Reducing sodium intake is one of the most cost-effective ways to improve health and reduce the burden of non-communicable diseases. And it is estimated that for every dollar investing in scaling up sodium reduction interventions, there will be a return of at least $12. The Pan American Health Organization supports its member states in reducing salt intake by implementing the WHO SHAKE technical package. And we are delighted to announce that an update to the SHAKE package has been launched this week by the WHO, providing a strategic framework aimed at reducing sodium intake from all sources, including pre-packaged foods, meals consumed outside the home, and discretionary salt use. This new version of the SHAKE package outlines the necessary steps and considerations for preparing, developing, implementing, monitoring, enforcing, and for the evaluation of effective policies and interventions, especially those who are mandatory. The region of the Americas has made advances in implementing the best buys for sodium reduction. For example, 12 countries have adopted front-of-package nutrition labeling of processed and ultra-processed products with excessive sodium content. And as many as 10 countries, including Argentina, Canada, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela, have started implementation. 3 countries are also implementing maximum sodium levels for different categories of processed and ultra-processed foods. And so during the Salt Awareness Week, the Pan American Health Organization emphasizes regulatory actions that countries can take to reduce sodium consumption, including interventions to reformulate food products to contain less sodium by setting maximum target levels for the amount of sodium in food and meals in a mandatory fashion. Therefore, implementing standards for front of package labeling, marketing restrictions, and creating supporting environments in public institutions that provide lower sodium options. This ultimately leads to applying behavioral changes as well in various communication strategies through social marketing to reduce salt consumption and measuring sodium population intake, sodium dietary sources, and sodium food content. We know that these interventions are cost-effective and feasible in low and middle-income countries. The Pan American Health Organization provides support to its member states by developing different tools, including the updated PAHO Regional Sodium Reduction Target, which was launched in October 2021. And this is a scorecard on best practices for the implementation of front of package labeling, which was recently published and will be featured today, as well as a compendium guide for the implementation of social marketing for developing public health interventions, which is focused on sodium reduction. Additionally, PAHO also developed a health impact analysis of sodium reduction policies in 5 countries. So, as you can see, we have a packed agenda for this morning, which is going to focus on regulatory interventions, and we are going to hear a little bit more about these recent publications and analysis, as well as country experiences in Peru and Uruguay on enforcement of front of package nutrition labeling. Additionally, we're going to learn about the Colombia experience on implementation of sodium targets and the work of civil society organizations to support the implementation of mandatory sodium targets. So we thank you all for your participation today, and I very much hope that this webinar continues to motivate and support countries to implement cost-effective sodium reduction policies using the tools developed both by PAHO and the WHO. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vanessa, for your inspiring remarks. And now I invite Fabio Gomez, Regional Advisor on Nutrition and Physical Activity of the Risk Factors and Nutrition Unit at the Pan American Health Organization. And he will present us on the best practices on front of pack labeling in the Americas. Fabio, the floor is yours. And thank you for your presentation.
Muchísimas gracias, Luis. Solo recordar a los colegas que acaban de conectarse que tienen la
Thank you very
opción de
much, Luis. I just want to remind
elegir el idioma
the colleagues
de su
that just connected that they
Zoom.
can
Tenemos
choose the language of their
simultáneamente
preference
entre
here in
inglés
Zoom.
y el
We have
español.
simultaneous
Y,
interpretation into
un
English
gusto
and
poder
Spanish.
celebrar esta
It is a
semana con
pleasure
ustedes
to
esta
celebrate this
conversación
week
sobre
with you
la importancia de reducir el
and raise
consumo
awareness
de
on the
sodio,
importance of reducing
y
the
en
consumption
particular
of
de tomar
sodium,
acciones de
and in
políticas que son
particular,
efectivas para apoyar la
taking
población
policy
en
actions that are
alcanzar
effective
las
to
metas
support the
recomendaciones de la
population in
OMS y de la
reaching
OPS.
the
Sabemos
targets and
que la
recommendations from
aplicación
PAHO
de
and
la etiqueta
WHO.
frontal
We
es una de
know that
las
front labeling
mejores
is one of
mejores
the
prácticas
best
para
practices
avanzar
and
con
the best bets
con
to be
la
able to move
reducción
forward with
del
the
índice de sodio y
reduction
prevención de
on
enfermedades no
sodium
transmisibles.
consumption,
Y por esa
as well
razón
as
hemos estado
preventing
apoyando a los países
non-communicable
en avanzar
diseases.
con
And
esta
this is why we
política
have
en
been
toda la región, pero
supporting
también
countries to move forward with this
recopilar y
policy in
producir
the region,
evidencia y
but also
producir
producing
y educación
evidence
a nuestros países
and
con base en
orientation
la mejor
for
evidencia y
countries
mejores prácticas
based on
en
evidence
nuestra
and
región.
best
Y con
practices in
este
your
objetivo
region.
nosotros
And so
formulamos
with this
esta
goal
publicación
in
que
mind, we
recién
created this
está
publication
disponible en
that
el
is
idioma,
now available,
en
I'm
el
sorry,
idioma español y
in
a la vez
Spanish,
tendremos
and it will
disponible también el
soon be
idioma
also
inglés.
available in
Es una
English.
publicación
It is
que
a
evalúa
publication
las
that
prácticas y las
assesses
políticas de etiquetado frontal
the
en todos los países
front
que ya
labeling
lo tienen
practices in
implementado
all
hasta el
countries
30
that
de
have
junio de
implemented
2024
this
y nosotros
since June
pretendemos seguir
2024.
haciendo esta
And we
publicación
seek to
a
continue
cada
doing
año, es
this
decir,
publication
que el
every
30
year.
de junio de
On
2025
June
tendremos
30th,
otro corte y
2025, we will
este
have
año
another
pretendemos
cut.
publicar
So this year, we want
nuevo
to
seguimiento
publish
de esta
new
evaluación
follow-ups
y
of
así
this
poder ir
and
monitoreando cómo va el progreso
so
en los
that we can
países en esta
monitor the
región.
progress of the countries
La
in a
evaluación
region.
consiste en este momento
The
en tres grandes
assessment
dimensiones.
has
Evaluamos
three
las
large
características
dimensions. We assess
del
the
diseño del
features
etiquetado
of
frontal que se adopta
design of
y
front
se
labeling
implementa en esos países,
adopted and
el
implemented in those
criterio que se
countries,
utiliza
the
para aplicar el
criteria
etiquetado
used to
frontal, o sea, qué
apply
productos deben
front
llevar
labeling.
los iconos de
So
etiquetado
which
frontal y la advertencia,
products should
y prohibiciones
contain
que
these
también
labels,
se plantea, es
and
decir, no
also
solo lo que se obliga a
prohibitions.
estar
So
en el
not
frente del
only
envase, como
what
debe ser el
must
etiquetado frontal de
be in the
advertencia,
front
pero
of the
también lo que se
package, but
exige
also
eliminar del
what
etiquetado frontal,
has to be
justamente para
removed
tener
from
más
front
coherencia con
labeling
la
to
recomendación
have
y la
more
información que
coherence
se
with
brinda
the
a la
recommendation
población.
and
Dentro de
the
esas tres
information provided
dimensiones
to
se
the
dividen en
population.
11 parámetros
Then we
que
have
vamos
11 parameters
presentar
that we're going to
más detalle
present
a seguir para
in a
evaluar
more detailed
cómo
manner
vamos
to
los países
assess
dentro de cada una de esas tres
how the
dimensiones.
countries are
La
doing
primera
in these
dimensión, que es la
dimensions.
dimensión del
The first
diseño,
dimension,
ha
which is
sido
design,
respaldada
has been
por la
backed
evidencia científica de
by
varios estudios
scientific
realizados en la región y
evidence
afuera de la región, pero
with
acá un
several
ejemplo
studies
de
done
varios estudios
inside
que
and outside the
nosotros desde la
region.
OPS hemos
But
estado
here we have several
apoyando.
examples that
Son
we have been
ensayos
supporting from
aleatorios
PAHO.
controlados
These
y han
are
demostrado la
controlled
superioridad
randomized
del
assays that
sistema
have
de
showed the
etiquetado frontal
superiority
de
of
advertencia
front
comparado
labeling
con
in
otros
terms of
sistemas que no son
warning
de
in comparison
advertencia. Y
with
acá
other
un
systems
ejemplo
that
del
are not
estudio que
warning
hicimos,
systems.
uno de los
And
primeros
here we have one
en
of the
Jamaica,
first studies that we
demostrando
did
que el
in
sistema
Jamaica
de
to
etiquetado
show
frontal
that
de
the
advertencia octagonal, por
front
ejemplo,
labeling
funciona de manera
works
superior al sistema de
much better
semáforo y también el
than
sistema
the
de
semaphore
lupa
system and then the
se aprobó en esta
magnifying glass
ocasión.
system that was
Finalmente, otros
tested on this
estudios que
occasion.
se realizaron por
Finally,
otros grupos de
other
investigación
studies
que
done
también
by other research
evaluaron
groups
otros tipos y diseños de
assessed
sistemas
other
de
types and
advertencia
systems
versus
of
el sistema
alert,
de lupa, otra
and
vez
they
demostrando la
assessed the
superioridad
magnifying
tanto del sistema
glass
de
system,
advertencia como del
um,
sistema octagonal.
and they also assessed
Bien
the
como
octagonal
estudios
system.
que van ya a probar las diferencias
Just like
en
studies
términos
that
experimentales con
show
relación a
differences through experiments
el cambio de comportamiento de los consumidores, y acá
regarding the
podemos ver, por
change
ejemplo, el
in
sistema
consumer
mexicano,
behavior. Here, for example, we can see the
sigue
Mexican
las
system. The
recomendaciones
Mexican
alineadas con
system
las
follows the
recomendaciones que hace
recommendations
la OPS,
provided by
encontrando
PAHO,
diferencias en ese estudio que
and
se probó
there are
la
differences in the
intención de
study
compra
because
en línea de
they
adolescentes de bebidas
tested the
azucaradas.
online buying
Podemos ver que se
intention
reduce la
by
cantidad de
teenagers
azúcares
online,
libres añadidos de
and
energía
it reduces the
adquirida
amount of
por los
free
adolescentes en
sugars
este experimento,
bought
y
by
también
adolescents in this
aumenta la
experiment,
percepción de
and
que esos productos no son
it
saludables.
also increases the
Al
perception that
contrario,
these
cuando
groups
vamos al
are not
sistema de
healthy.
lupa, no se
When we
encuentra
go
ninguna
to the
diferencia entre el grupo
magnifying
que
glass
no
system,
tenía
we
ninguna
don't find
información
any
y el grupo que
differences
tenía la
between the group
lupa.
that had information
Y
and
eso
the
habla un
group that
poco de
didn't
la
have
evidencia que
information.
expresa
The group that had the magnifying glass and the group
los
that didn't
elementos
have
de
it.
resultados
And so this
la
expresses
evaluación que hacemos con
the
relación al
results
diseño
that we
gráfico. Podemos ver
can see
que los
regarding
sistemas
graphic
que
design.
encontramos,
We
por
can
ejemplo,
see
en
that the
Argentina,
systems that we
Colombia,
find in
México, están
Argentina,
más alineados
Colombia,
con
Mexico
tanto los
are
elementos
more
del tipo
aligned
de
with
icono, el tamaño
the type of
y
icons, the
proporcionalmente
size
más
that occupies
área de la
most of
superficie
the
principal de
area of the
exhibición, y
main
están
surface,
específicamente
and they are
identificados en la
specifically
legislación, de donde deben
identified
ser
in the
ubicados
legislation.
para evitar
The legislation specifies where they must
alguna
be placed
posibilidad que la
to
industria puede esconder estas
avoid the possibility
advertencias
that
por
the
el costado
industry
del
can hide
producto
these
o a la
warnings
parte
on the
posterior.
product side or behind.
El otro punto es el punto de los criterios.
The
Es muy
other point is the
importante
criteria.
establecer los umbrales
It's
que van a
very
definir qué
important to
productos deben llevar
establish
las advertencias.
thresholds
Y acá
that
unos ejemplos de
establish
cómo
thresholds that define which products should
los criterios
have
que se
alerts.
definen para establecer eso
The
pueden dejar a
criteria
los consumidores sin información en productos que son
define might
claramente
leave
excesivos
consumers without
en sodio, de
information for
acuerdo
products that
con
have excessive sodium,
el perfil de nutrientes de la OPS y las recomendaciones de la OMS. En este caso
according to
tenemos
what PAHO and
la
WTO say.
política implementada
In
de
this case, we
Argentina,
can
que
see the
sigue los
policy
parámetros
implemented in Argentina
de
that
la
follows
OPS alineados con las
the
metas de
parameters of
ingesta
PAHO
de la OMS para sodio,
and also
el
consumption
sistema
targets in terms of
los
sodium.
umbrales establecidos en
And the
Brasil,
established
que
thresholds
vemos que
in
están
Brazil
más
are
distantes de la
different, are
recomendación,
further away from the recommendations. And we have that in several products. We can see a very clear difference in terms of information provided to consumers. We also have evidence that the people that consume products that have too much sodium, according to the nutrient profile from PAHO, have twice as many possibilities to be over the limits defined by PAHO in terms of sodium consumption. This includes 125,000 people in 9 countries. The more sodium products with sodium you consume, according to this profile, the bigger is the further where you get from the recommendations. On the other hand, we know that this reduction is very clear. We know where the octagonal warnings are. Here we have results from Chile 2019. And after several years, we were able to reduce the amount of sugar, energy, sodium, and fats, saturated fats.
Los resultados de México que pueden ver que son superiores a lo que se
Here are the
encuentra
Mexico results, which are
Chile. Y una ventaja
superior to those in Chile.
Que tiene que ver con dos elementos.
And the advantage has to do with two elements. First of all, in Mexico, they have used the nutrient profile model, and so they're more in line with what is recommended in terms of consumption at WHO. What Chile didn't have on that occasion, we understand that it's a process and that countries seek to improve what they do little by little. And in Chile, Mexico, there's no publicity or advertising regulation. Mexico works only with labeling and packaging, and they have achieved a result superior to that of Chile in only 2 years, and also with reductions in schools. Countries seek to reduce the amount of sodium, but we also acknowledge that cardiovascular disease is intimately related to ultra-processed foods consumption. And our organs and our systems are all affected by the consumption of ultra-processed foods. And so besides the consumption of sodium, there are other factors that increase the risk of cardiovascular diseases. And so the countries are concerned, they want to work on this. And so we have been working on consultation for this in Colombia and some recommendations. We are monitoring the nutrient profile in the countries besides aligning with consumption suggestions, and we are seeing how many of these nutrient models can capture ultra-processed foods. And here we see the countries that are more aligned and then have applied the nutrient model from PAHO. These countries are capture almost all ultra-processed foods in the top 3 countries, and then we have countries that have other nutrient profile models that still need to align with PAHO's recommendations because they leave a lot of ultra-processed foods outside, like for example, in the case of Brazil. So many ultra-processed foods don't have any information on the packaging for consumers. Regarding prohibitions, We have evidence
que no
that there
introducimos
are
porque son introducidos
elements
por la industria para hacer alegaciones de que son saludables, para hacer alegaciones que
introduced
tienen
by the
propiedades
industry
nutricionales.
to say that the product
También
is healthy, to
influyen en la
have that
decisión
it
que toman
has
los consumidores. Si
nutritional
tenemos
features.
información que puede influir
That we have
y
information that can
promocionar
influence,
esos productos,
that can
tenemos
promote those
una
products. We
herramienta
have a
en
tool
contra de nuestro objetivo, que es de reducir el consumo de esos productos.
to reduce the
Entonces,
consumption of these
tanto
products.
las restricciones
So the
de
restrictions
alegaciones sobre nutrientes, como las
in
restricciones
terms of
de
nutrient
personajes
allegation
infantiles son
and
medidas
the
necesarias
reduction
para
of
que el etiquetado junto a la advertencia pueda tener mejor efectividad.
influence
La
characters are
evidencia
very
anterior
important so that
tenemos
the
un
measures are more
estudio en
effective.
Suiza que
So
demuestra que los
here we have
productos,
a
cuando
study
simplemente
from
ponen la palabra
Switzerland that
fruta,
shows that
hacen que las personas perciban este producto como más saludable. En este
even, for
estudio, por ejemplo,
example, using the
ya
word
en Inglaterra
fruit
se
makes
demuestra
people
que los
perceive the
niños,
product
por
as
ver los
healthier. And
personajes
this
infantiles,
UK
ya
study shows that when
experimentan un sabor
children
distinto o
look at
mejorado solamente por la presencia de
these
estos
characters,
pingüinos,
they
favoreciendo el consumo de esos
find that the
productos. Entonces,
product is
es
tastier.
fundamental que si esos
And
productos son
so it is,
excesivos en algunos de esos nutrientes, no puedan, que tenemos que limitar, como
and so
azúcar,
we have to
sodio, grasas saturadas,
limit
tengamos que
sodium,
prohibir la presencia de
saturated
esos
fats,
alimentos.
and we
En
have to
particular, porque en
prohibit
muchos
the
casos
presence of these foods,
estas alegaciones
these
de
ingredients.
nutrientes o de salud
And
están relacionadas
nutrient
a
allegations or health
micronutrientes o
allegations are
vitaminas.
usually
Entonces,
related to
no podemos
micronutrients
simplemente
or vitamins.
restringir las
So we
alegaciones
cannot
relacionadas
just
a los
restrict
nutrientes
allegations regarding
que
nutrients,
tratamos, como sodio, por ejemplo. O sea,
like
tenemos que ver
sodium,
si
for
está
example, even if
la cantidad excesiva
there
de
is no
grasas saturadas. No
excessive
podemos dejar
saturated fats.
una alegación sobre sodio,
We cannot
justamente, o
leave an
sobre otra
allegation
vitamina,
on
porque
sodium
estas alegaciones es
or
buena
other
promover el
vitamins
consumo
because this
de
is
este
important
producto.
to promote
Tenemos
the
que ser
consumption of this
coherentes. Sí,
product.
la
We have
evidencia es
to
muy
be
clara de que los
coherent,
productos que
and
tienen
there
un estudio realizado en Brasil, que
there's a
la
study in
presencia de
Brazil
las
that
alocaciones
show that the
reduce la
presence of
intención de
allegations
compra de esos productos y
reduces
la
the
percepción de que
intention of
esos
buying
productos son
and the perception that these products
que
are
esos productos no son saludables, o sea, la
that these
falsa
products are
percepción
not
de que esos
healthy.
productos
So
son
the fake perception that these
saludables.
products are
Por esa
healthy.
razón y con base en
And
eso,
so,
nosotros
given
también
that
hemos hecho
reason,
nuestra evaluación
we
y vemos
have done
entre
our
los países
assessment,
que
and we see
hasta el
in the
30 de junio
countries
de
that
2024
until
tenían una
June 30th,
implementación más
2024,
alineada con estas
there was an
recomendaciones, con la
implementation more
evidencia.
aligned with these recommendations.
Argentina,
This was
México,
more aligned. We
y
had here
los países
Argentina,
que todavía
Mexico,
tienen que
and the
hacer
countries that
provisiones, incluir
still have
provisiones en sus
to
legislaciones
include prohibitions in
para
their
mejorar eso, que
legislations to
todavía no
improve,
incluyen, como Uruguay, Brasil,
like countries that
Ecuador.
have not included,
Con
like
eso
Uruguay, Brazil,
termino,
Ecuador.
y
I will
ahora
end with this,
tendremos
and
la
now
oportunidad
we will have the
de
opportunity
pasar a
to
nuestro próximo panel.
listen to our
Voy
next
a
panel.
dejar de
I'm going to
compartir mi
stop
pantalla,
sharing my screen,
y si tienen
and
preguntas,
if you have
pueden
questions,
utilizar el botón
you can
Q&A, en
use
donde podrán
the
hacer las
Q&A
preguntas
button
y
to
tendremos
ask your
agrado de
questions,
contestar en un
and we
momento
will be
oportuno.
we will have the
Ahora
opportunity to answer your
pasamos
questions in a timely manner.
a un
But
panel de
now we're
experiencias de
going to
país
listen to
sobre
a
el monitoreo y
country
fiscalización del
experience
etiquetado frontal
panel
de
on
advertencia en las
monitoring
Américas,
upfront labeling in the
y vamos a
Americas.
escuchar de dos
And we're going
panelistas.
to
Rosana
listen to
Bautista,
two
que es
panelists, Rosana Bautista.
que representa la
She
comisión en esta
represents
ocasión
the
de
Commission
fiscalización de competencia
on
desleal del Instituto Nacional de Defensa de la
Inspection
Competencia y de la
for
Protección de la Propiedad
Disloyal
Intelectual, INDECOPI,
Competition
INDECOPI,
in the
en
COPY
Perú, y
institution in
Jimena
Peru, and
Moratorio,
Jimena
coordinadora del
Moratorio,
programa de nutrición del
coordinator of
Ministerio de
the
Salud
nutrition
Pública
program in the Ministry of
de
Public
la
Health
República de
in
Uruguay.
Uruguay.
Empezamos
Let's
con una
start
presentación de 10
with a
minutos de cada uno de los
10-minute presentation
panelistas,
from each of
y
the
enseguida
panelists,
tendremos una
and then
ronda en unos minutos
we
para
will have a
algunas
round
preguntas.
in some minutes to listen to some
Arrancamos
questions.
contigo, Rosana.
Let's
Muchísimas
start
gracias por
with
su disponibilidad
Rosanna. Thank you very much for
y
your
su presencia el día de
availability
hoy.
and
Muchas
your
gracias.
presence today.
Muchas gracias, Fabio. Un
Thank you
placer
very much, Fabio.
acompañarlos. Un saludo a
It is a
todos y
pleasure to be
un
with you.
abrazo desde Perú. Como bien
And
señalaba
greetings
Fabio,
from
el día de
Peru,
hoy
as Fabio was
nos da
saying.
la posibilidad
Today, we have the possibility of explaining what are the competences, what is the progress made, how gaps have been closed in terms of experience and inspection regarding healthy food. Today we'll talk about country experiences in the monitoring and inspection of front labeling for in the Americas. In Peru, we have an institution called Indicopi. What is Indicopi? It is an organization, is a specialized public organization in terms of competition and intellectual property. It protects the rights of consumers and fosters a culture of honest competition in Peruvian economy, but it also protects intellectual property. It is important to highlight that this institution has offices, regional offices at a national level, and these offices also have some faculties to carry out monitorings, inspections, and even apply sanctions if the regulations are not respected in terms of healthy food.
I mentioned the Control Commission regulates illegal competition or disloyal competition, but besides monitoring and controlling, it also has a promoting role. This commission seeks to generate protection of consumer rights and thus advertising and loyal competition goes hand in hand with more informed consumers and more responsible providers. Concerning the regulations on healthy food, what are the involved players as considered by Peru? First of all, the Control Commission, as we described it, and internally we have a support organization called the Control Directorate. The Control Directorate is a support organization that goes to the market and controls, takes the corresponding photographs, gathers all the information you can find concerning advertising on products, and it also monitors social media. The law that promotes healthy food in Peru points out in Article 11 that this area of Indicopi has to control and sanction. The regulatory framework has two filters. As Fabio mentioned a while ago, it controls processed foods, and the second filter, and importantly, advertising should be addressed preferably to both girls and adolescents under 16 years of age. That's what this regulation aims at. The law that promotes healthy foods for both girls and adolescents has several articles and subsections where we consider food advertising for non-alcoholic beverages and for foods, and what the market must do. For example, they can't promote advertising, incentivizing immoderate consumption of foods and non-alcoholic beverages, show inappropriate portions, use arguments and techniques that exploit children, lack of experience, and promote ingestion. There are several subsections. We'd like to talk about subsection M because we solved several cases in this regard, which has to do with showing images of natural products if they aren't natural products. So the regulation on healthy food in Peru also connects with this. At the same time, we also have the
Como en buen empresario,
advertising
tenemos el octógono alto en grasas saturadas, alto en
manual,
azúcar y
like for
alto en
example,
gluten,
high in
ética o
saturated
consumo
fat and
eficiente.
sugar and sodium,
También tenemos a la mano derecha los
also
elementos técnicos.
prevent
Por
excessive
último, esta
consumption,
muestra también está
also
conforme
containing
contemplando que el
trans
octógono
fats
contiene grasas
and
saturadas.
avoid consumption. At a
De
certain
manera es
point,
importante también
we
señalar que
had
nuestro
also
marco
this,
normativo
but our
cuenta con una
regulatory
norma que
framework
elimina
has
totalmente
a
todas las
regulation
grasas
that
trans de la
totally
etiqueta.
eliminates trans
Como ven
fats
en
in any
pantalla,
product,
en
so we
esta
don't have
norma y
this
en el manual de advertencias publicitarias se señala
warning anymore.
cómo
So
tienen que ir
our
los octógonos, el
advertising
uso, las
warning
características
manual
y
refers
también
to
sobre todo es importante
octagons,
resaltar
its
los propósitos,
characteristics,
¿no? Acá tenemos, por ejemplo,
and
cómo
supports.
debe ir
Like, for
la
example, here,
característica y el
uh,
lineamiento en cuanto a la publicidad.
fixed and
Luego
moving
tenemos
images
también
concerning advertising.
versar sobre la publicidad en
We
medios
also
impresos.
have
Hoy en día
advertising in
reconocer
printed
que las
media.
redes sociales
We know
nos
that
han
the
implementado
social
bastantes
media
trabajos
have
y bueno, ahí estamos
complicated
hablando
our
de que en
work,
el país
but we're
también se
trying to do
contempla los medios
the best we
impresos,
can.
los medios
We also
radiales
consider
y audiovisuales
printed
y
media,
por
as
eso
I
en las
said,
normas se
also
mencionan
radio and
todas las
audiovisuals. And our
características de cómo
regulations
tiene que
include
ir,
all the
cuáles son
characteristics
las
for
mediciones del
all these
octógono.
kinds of
Esto con el ánimo de que los
advertising in
agentes
the media.
económicos tengan en
The
conocimiento
idea is
cómo
the
tienen
economic
que realizarse
agents
las
uh,
advertencias
to
publicitarias.
know how
Como mencionamos,
warnings
el
have to be
reglamento
placed.
también en el Perú
As I
contamos con un
mentioned a while
reglamento que
ago,
establece el proceso de
Peru has
reducción
a
gradual
regulation
hasta la
concerning
eliminación de
gradual
grasas trans.
reduction towards the
Vemos
elimination of
acá en
trans
pantalla unos
fats.
casos resueltos
We
en
have
estas
some cases we
competencias.
solved
Todos
on
los
the
casos
screen.
expuestos son de
Um,
naturaleza
these
pública, es
exposed
decir, todas las
cases
resoluciones están
were
colgadas en la página web
public, and
del
all our
Indecopi. En este
resolutions
caso,
are in our
iniciamos el primer
website.
caso por haber
This is
incumplido
the first
justo el inciso
case
que
of
mencionaba el inciso
non-compliance
M del
concerning
artículo 8 de
subsection
la Ley de
M and
Alimentación
Article
Saludable
8
y en
of
este caso
the
en particular
Healthy
de la empresa
Food
que tienen
Law.
en pantalla
This
fue
is the
sancionada
company, and it
por
was
Indecopi.
sanctioned by Indecopi.
Luego tenemos otro caso que creo
We
que el
have
producto
another
lo tenemos en
case.
varios
This
países que
product,
estamos
I think,
participando el día de hoy.
exists in
Este
several
caso
countries
básicamente fue
participating
resuelto en
here.
el año
This case was
2021
solved in
y fue
2021,
rechazado en base a
and it was dealt
incumplimiento
with based
de la
upon
Ley de Alimentación
non-compliance
Saludable,
with the Healthy
¿no? En
Food
cuanto también
Law
en combinación con el
in
manual de advertencias
combination with
publicitarias,
the
toda vez de que no
advertising
tenían
warning manual,
la
because
medida, en este caso el octógono
it
de
had
grasas
no
trans.
octagons on
Y
trans
luego pues
fats in
vamos a
this
ir a
case.
un caso
And now we
prominente
go
de los octógonos, ¿no? Como
to
mencionaba la
the case
empresa
of
nacional
octagons.
acá en el
This is
país,
a
que fue
domestic
sancionada por no contener
company in the
también un
country
octógono
that was
alto en
sanctioned
grasas
for not
saturadas.
having this octagon
Y
on
finalmente otro
saturated
caso
fats.
también por no
Finally,
contener el
another
octógono
case because
alto
they
en azúcar.
didn't contain the
Como ven,
octagon
también por el tiempo he traído
high
muy
in
pocos
sugar.
casitos y quisiera explicarles
These are
cuáles son
just a
los
few cases
mecanismos
because I
para
don't
el
have much time.
monitoreo y
These are
fiscalización
the
y el
mechanisms
insumo,
for
sobre todo para las
monitoring
alegaciones
and
preliminares.
control. And
Importante
this is the
destacar que el
input for
Indecopi,
preliminary
además de recibir
investigation.
denuncias de parte,
Indecopi
es decir,
receives
cuando un usuario
claims from the
considera
public.
y
That is,
aprecia que
when
en
a
el
user
mercado
considers
existiría
that
algún
there
incumplimiento,
is non-compliance
puede
in the
presentar
market,
una denuncia
the
cumpliendo
person
los
can
requisitos establecidos en la
file a
norma.
claim
Sin embargo,
according to
debo destacar
requirement.
que también el
I
Indecopi
must also
inicia
highlight
de
that
oficio
we start
investigaciones preliminares
ex
y
officio
es
investigation
probable pueden también
that
iniciarse
can
los
lead
procedimientos sancionadores,
to
donde
sanctioning
la comisión
procedures.
tendrá la posibilidad
And the
de
Commission
revisar
has the
todos los
possibility
indicios,
of
todas las pruebas
reviewing
recabadas
all
en la primera etapa de investigación y decidir si es
the
que
different
inicia o no algún procedimiento sancionador.
proofs
Pero
and
ustedes se
decide if
preguntarán
they start
cómo
a
el
sanctioning
Indecopi inicia
procedure
las
or
investigaciones
not.
preliminares.
Now, how
Pues
do
bien,
we start
nosotros iniciamos
preliminary
el equipo de
investigation?
prevención de esta comisión,
Our prevention
inicia, por
team
ejemplo, las
starts
investigaciones
investigations following emails sent by users. Users send information to consultation email we have in the commission. We can also start preliminary investigations stemming from news that come up in different mass media. We have an Ibero-American network for consumer protection. This is also an input to start our investigations. We also receive informative claims. We also check the trends in the social media. We have a great press team that monitors all of Indicopy's social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We have lots of information on those media. We also have hashtags. We can prepare podcasts on different things. We also have the annual control plan. This annual control plan coordinates work among different Indicopy areas on different aspects of markets, products, and sectors to be investigated along the year. All the Indicopy sections or divisions are specifying, pointing out, and choosing the sectors that will be investigated next year, 2027. This is a healthy food sector, and it is always included in the annual control plan. Also, economic agents can get to know that Indicopy will control their sector. Another interesting point that we should communicate to you is that we have anonymous messages from competitors. Competitors can also file claims against their competing companies. We also have anonymous writings, interviews in the mass media, and training. What is the process flow? Can you please close because time is running? Okay, Fabio, what's the process flow? We first do a search, we identify the announcer, we contact this announcer, and then the commission decides to start some sanctioning procedure. Statistics. This is my last slide. Since 2018 to date, we started 322 preliminary investigations concerning healthy food and warnings. Last year, we sent information letters to influencers who promote some foods concerning investigations that went to sanctioning procedures. 221 were started, 190 were solved, and we gave fines for 990.72 UITs, that is $1.5 million. A novelty here is that we implemented a different rate for consumers to file more claims. Thank you very much, Fabio. Thank you very much, Rosana. It was very difficult to cut because we know that the control and monitoring system in Peru is robust, and we always learn from you. And we love to have this opportunity for having you share with other countries. Besides all the systems governance and the different entry points to monitor and control, there's involvement of citizens in claiming and supporting the government in doing this monitoring. I think all this gathers very important elements that lead monitoring and control to be very effective. Thank you very much. Now we pass the floor to Jimena Moratorio. She will talk from Uruguay. Jimena, you have the floor.
Perdón, me equivoqué.
Excuse me. I
Espérenme un minuto que la
mistook my
tecnología no me
screen.
acompaña.
Just a second. I need to deal with this technology.
No estoy pudiendo poner en modo presentación. No sé si...
I don't know. It's the
Okay.
presentation mode is not working.
Si nos
We
ayudas a
can
dejar de
share it.
compartir, perfecto.
Stop sharing, please. Okay.
Adelante, Jimena.
We can share it for you.
Espera, dame un segundo porque no puedo salir de la presentación ahora.
Give me a
Ya tenemos la
second.
presentación en
Ahí.
pantalla. Ok.
No, es que me había
Ah, ok.
quedado como trancada la pantalla en la
Yeah,
presentación. Bueno, disculpas.
the
Buenos
screen
días
was
para todos.
stuck in
Muchas
my
gracias por la
presentation. Good
invitación.
morning,
A los
everybody.
organizadores
Thanks
del
for the
evento y bueno,
invitation.
ojalá que la experiencia de Uruguay pueda
And
servir,
I hope Uruguay's experience can
como
be
antecedente
helpful.
en los aciertos y en los errores, porque bueno, no
We
son
had
nada. Tenemos
pros
mucho para
and
mejorar
cons in our
todavía,
work,
pero bueno,
and
también
we have a lot to
estos
improve,
aprendizajes
but
pueden servir
we learn
para
from all
otros.
that.
Bueno,
And
arrancamos
that
como
can be
antes,
helpful
mientras
for
me está
others.
pasando las
So
diapositivas. Ahí va. Bueno, el marco
let's start with this
normativo de
slide.
Uruguay
This is
fue sancionado en el
Uruguay's
año
regulatory
2018 a
framework.
través de un
It
decreto
comes from 2018.
del
There
Poder
was
Ejecutivo
an
y no voy
executive
a
decree.
presentar todos los
I
pasos,
won't
simplemente
present all the
nombrar como
steps.
punto de referencia
Just
que tuvo varios cambios
remember that we had
hasta el momento
several
de hoy con dos
changes
cambios
to
en lo que
date.
tiene que ver con
Two
los parámetros
changes have
de
to do
aplicación del
with
rotulado
the
frontal,
parameters
modificando
of
los criterios para definir
FOPL,
el
and we
exceso
changed the
de
criteria
nutrientes. Esto
to
lo
define
remarco porque
the
tiene
excess
implicancias
of
posteriores
nutrients.
en
I
lo que tiene que
highlight
ver
this
con el
because it has
monitoreo y el control
further implications
del rotulado.
to monitoring and control
Finalmente, la
of
normativa
FOPL.
fue de
Finally,
aplicación efectiva en
the
febrero del
regulation was
2021,
effectively applied
donde ya
in
se habían
February
empezado a
2021,
realizar
where we
diferentes
had started
mecanismos de adecuación
different
de procesos de registro y control y
mechanisms
publicación de
for
manuales de
registration
aplicación
control
para facilitar
and
justamente
application
las tareas de
manuals to
registro y control.
facilitate registration and control tasks.
Bueno, este es el rotulado frontal de Uruguay que
This
establece
is
la
FOPL
información al
in Uruguay.
consumidor
It
sobre el exceso en el
establishes
contenido de
information to
azúcares saturados,
consumers
sodio
concerning
y
excessive
azúcares
fats,
en productos
saturated
que cumplen con
fats,
determinados requisitos.
sodium, and
El
sugar.
decreto se incorpora,
The
que es
decree
digamos, la costumbre en
has to do
Uruguay,
with some
toda la normativa
requirements,
alimentaria
and
se
this
incorpora como
decree
una
was
modificación del reglamento
incorporated
bromatológico
as
nacional que se
an
reiteró
amendment
el 15
of
del
the
98.
National
Estos son los
Bromatological
parámetros que
Regulation.
establecen la definición de
These
contenido
are the
excesivo de
parameters
nutrientes
that
al día de
establish
hoy, que
what
son
is
los que se
excessive.
están aplicando,
This
que
is what
son
we
para
apply
alimentos
now
sólidos 13 gramos
for
de
solid
azúcar,
foods,
para
13,
líquidos 3
13
gramos, para
grams of
grasas
sugar,
totales
13
13 y
grams of
sólidos
total
4.
fats.
En líquidos,
For
grasas saturadas
saturated
6
fats,
y
6
13 líquidos,
grams,
500
and for
miligramos de
sodium,
sodio para
500
líquidos
milligrams, and
sólidos
in
y 200
liquid
miligramos
ones,
en
3,
líquidos.
4, 3, and 200
El
grams and
octógono con
200 milligrams,
de color
respectively.
negro, con letras blancas, que
Octagons
contiene
are
la
in
palabra exceso y
black
que
with white
señala
letters
el
containing
contenido
the word
excesivo
excess.
cuando los
They
nutrientes
point out
superan
at
los
the
valores
excessive
establecidos.
content when
No se aplica
nutrients
a
is
todos los alimentos, sino que se aplica a
exceed
aquellos
established
que
values. It
se
isn't
envasan en
applied to all
ausencia del
foods.
consumidor,
It's applied to
que además ya están
foods that
por
are
la
packed
normativa
in
obligados a
or
aplicar la
packaged,
norma de rotulado
and they
nutricional,
have to
¿sí?
apply
Y
this
que tienen
nutritional
adición de
warning.
algunos de los nutrientes críticos, ya sea grasas, azúcares o
And
sodio, por lo
they
cual el
have
rotulado está enfocado en
added
los productos
these
procesados y
nutrients that are
ultraprocesados. Se
critical. And this
exceptúan
is
además
processed and ultra
algunos productos
processed
que
foods. We
se rigen
accept
por
some products that have specific regulations, like, for example, diet supplements, supplements for sports people, also sweeteners and baby food. They're outside this regulation.
Bueno, la norma también establece que el
The
rótulo debe
regulation also
colocarse en la cara
establishes
frontal
that
principal del envase,
the
pero no establece de forma
FOPL has to
obligatoria
be
en
on
qué
the
cuadrante de la
front of
misma
the
debe
package,
colocarse, y
but
este es un
the
aspecto
quadrant
que
is not
se debe
mandatory.
mejorar,
This is an
porque a la
aspect that
hora
needs to be
de
improved
evaluar la
because
exposición del
when we
producto, la
evaluate
visualización
product exposure
de la
and
advertencia en el rótulo, esto
visualization of
realmente
warning
se
in
identifica como una debilidad de nuestra norma.
the
Establece además
FOPL,
que
our
los productos deben
regulation
aplicarlo
is weak.
aquellos que
Products have
tienen
to
una
apply
cara frontal
it
principal
on
mayor a
the
30
main
centímetros
front
cuadrados, un área de cara frontal
in an
principal,
area
y
that
aquellos que
is
tienen
longer
un área
than
menor deben
30
colocar la advertencia en
square
el envase
centimeters. Those
secundario, ¿sí?
in
La
the
advertencia aumenta de
that have
tamaño en
a
función al
smaller
tamaño
shape, they
del
have to put
propio
it
envase.
on the
Una
secondary
diferencia con
packaging.
respecto a otras normativas es que
Reference concerning other
en nuestra
regulations
norma se
is that
establece
our
el
regulation
tamaño de
establishes
el envase y
the
no de la
size
etiqueta,
of the
¿sí?
package
A
and
diferencia
not
por
of the
ahí, por ejemplo,
label.
con la
It's
normativa
different
de Chile. Y
from
se
the
autoriza
Chilean
el uso de
regulation, for example,
adhesivos
and
siempre que
we
sean de
authorize
forma
the use of
indeleble y que cumplan
stickers
con todos los
if
requisitos
they
de
are
color, característica,
indelible
tamaño y
and
ubicación.
they comply with all
Sí,
the characteristics
nosotros
concerning
tenemos
size
un gran
and
mercado de productos
requirements such as
importados, no
size and
somos un
characteristics.
mercado
We have lots of
muy
imported
pequeño,
products.
y hay
We
una
are a
alta
very small
dependencia de productos
market,
procesados y
and
sobre todo
we depend a
ultraprocesados
lot on
de la importación de productos, por lo
imports,
cual
and that's the case for
esta
processed and
posibilidad se
ultra-processed
estableció
foods.
para,
This
digamos
possibility
que no
was
exigir
then
un etiquetado
established
en origen para un mercado pequeño. Esa era como el argumento, ¿sí?
because they argued that they couldn't put a label for such a small market as ours. So that's why we accept stickers. Well, differently from other countries, our country has a governance depending on the Ministry of Health, but there are other organizations included. Decree 272, dated 2018, that established FOPL, stated that control was under the charge of the Ministry of Health, so it had a central role, but there were also constitutional and legal competencies attributed to other public organizations and entities. So we have the 19 departmental governments of our country. Our country is divided in 19 regions.
Dentro de las intendencias departamentales, los servicios de
These
regulación alimentaria de cada uno,
governments have food regulation services. There's also the Ministry of Public Health with its food department that establishes guidelines for all the food registration activity, the General Control Directorate, and the Ministry of Industry, Energy, and Mines through the Uruguayan Technological Laboratory. An element I'd like to highlight is that this has meant progress in our national food system. We recently incorporated the single registration of foods, companies, and vehicles. Perhaps it sounds a bit strange, but it's a unification of bromatological activities in all our 19 departments. And why is this so? Because, as we will see in the following slide, our country uses
o tiene como requisito el registro de los productos, ¿sí? La autorización de la
Product
comercialización de los
registration.
productos. Y si bien el Ministerio
Products
de
are
Salud
authorized to
realiza
be
el
sold.
control y el
The
registro de
Ministry
los
of
productos
Health
modificados y el
controls
resto de los
and
alimentos
registers
que se encuentran en
modified
plaza,
products, but
¿sí?
the
Los
other
productos regulares, que son la
food
gran
in the
mayoría de lo que
market,
consumimos,
most
son
of what we
registrados y la
consume,
autorización de
are
comercialización
registered
se otorga en las intendencias departamentales.
at the departmental
Antes
governments.
de la puesta en marcha del RUNAEV,
Before the
los productos
RUNAEV
debían
was
registrarse y obtener la
implemented, products
autorización
had
en
to
cada
be
una de las
registered and authorized in
A partir de la
at each
incorporación
one
del
of these
RUNAEV, hay un
governments.
registro único
But when we
nacional que
started with the
sirve
RUNAEV, there is a single
que
national
autoriza la comercialización a
registry
nivel de todo
that
el país, ¿sí?
authorizes
Entonces,
sale
el
at all
control del
levels in
cumplimiento
the
al ingreso al
country.
mercado, por
So,
un lado, se hace
controlling
hacia los alimentos
compliance
notificados en el Ministerio
before
de Salud, en el
market
resto de los
entry is done
alimentos
by the
en las
Ministry of Health,
intendencias
and for the
departamentales.
rest of
Ambas
food
instituciones
at departmental governments.
solicitan
Both
lo que es la
institutions
fórmula cual y quantitativa,
request
¿no? Con la
the
declaración
quantitative
de
formula with the
ingredientes,
declaration of
la
ingredients
composición del producto, la tabla
and product
nutricional y la
composition, its
aprobación
nutritional
también del
table,
diseño
and
de la
also
etiqueta
approval
base,
of
¿sí? Que
the
se chequea que
packaging
cumpla con todas las normas
label
vigentes.
design,
Pero a su vez,
which
los
has to comply
productos
with
importados,
regulations.
luego de hacer el
Now,
registro
imported
en
products,
la
after
dependencia,
being
obviamente, que el producto
registered
responda del tipo de
at the
producto,
ministry
requieren también
or
un
the
certificado, ¿sí? De comercialización otorgado por
regional
por el
government
Laboratorio
require a
Tecnológico del Uruguay.
certification
Es decir, que el
provided
producto
by
se
the
registra, pero
Uruguayan
una vez que se
Technological
realiza la
Lab.
importación,
So
debe
the product
obtener
is
este
registered,
certificado de
but when
comercialización.
imported, it has
El
to get
LATU
the sales
realiza un
certification by
muestreo
LATU,
que está
the
basado
laboratory.
en análisis de
LATU
riesgo,
does
donde
so
se
through
verifica el
risk
cumplimiento
analysis
de
and
todo el
sampling
decreto
to
315, incluyendo, por
verify
supuesto, el
the
rótulo
product
nutricional y el
complies
PAHO.
with Decree
¿Sí? Se
315.
hacen a su vez
At the same time,
muestreos
they
de laboratorio
do
donde se
laboratory
determina
sampling to
la composición del
determine
producto y se
product
compara con la
composition,
declaración de
and
nutrientes
that's compared with the
para ver si
nutrient
hay correspondencia
declaration
entre
to
lo que
see
declara la
if
empresa y la
what the
composición
company
real del
declares
producto.
corresponds to
Siguiente.
the product's real composition.
Ahí va.
Next one,
Como les
please.
decía, se hace la
As
extracción
I
de muestras de
said,
los
we
depósitos previo a que
extract
los productos
samples
ingresen al
from
mercado, se compara con
warehouses
el rótulo
before the
aprobado al momento
products
del
get
registro
into
del
the
RUNAEP,
market.
si
We
están los
compare
octógonos que
that
fueron
with
registrados, y si hay consistencia entre
UNEV's
el análisis de
registration,
laboratorio
and if there is
y
consistency
la
between the
declaración de
lab
nutrientes.
analysis and the nutrient
Y bueno, y se verifica
um,
si está la presencia o no. Si hay
declaration,
inconsistencias, no se otorga el certificado de
they
comercialización y se emite un
give them
informe al
a
INCP que puede tomar
commercialization
la
certificate.
resolución.
If not,
Entonces ese producto no
it
estaría
is not
autorizado a ingresar al
authorized
mercado hasta que
to
no haga
enter
las
the
adecuaciones
market until
correspondientes, ¿sí?
it's
Esto
not
puede derivar en un cambio de registro,
adapted. It can
¿sí?
derive
O en
into
un
a
cambio
change
de
of
etiqueta,
registration
¿sí?
or
Ese
a
sería
change of
como
label.
el procedimiento.
That's a
No
procedure.
se muestrea el 100% de los
We
lotes que
don't
ingresan, esto lo
sample
quiero aclarar,
100% of
sino que se
batches
hace en forma
entering the
aleatoria y de acuerdo a
country.
análisis de riesgo.
It
Por ejemplo, si
is
hay un incumplimiento,
random,
bueno,
and it's
las
according
próximas
to
importaciones se muestrean todos, ¿sí? En función
if
de los
there's
antecedentes de la
non-compliance,
industria, del
then the
tipo de
next batch
producto,
is
se
completely
determina cuándo se
checked.
muestrea y cuándo no. Siguiente.
¿Y puedes ir cerrando, Jimena, por el
Can
tiempo
you
que
close,
nos
Jimena?
Bueno, el Ministerio de Salud
The
tiene
Ministry
competencia
of
sobre
Health
la vigilancia del mercado y esto lo hace en coordinación
surveils
con
the
las
market
intendencias
together with
departamentales.
the
Realmente nosotros
departmental
tenemos que focalizarnos mucho en lo que es
governments.
la vigilancia
We
del
have
mercado.
to
El
strengthen
Ministerio está
market
rediseñando los
surveillance. The
procesos de
ministry
fiscalización y es
is
necesario avanzar en
redesigning
la
control
generación de controles
processes
que
that
sean más
we need to
sistemáticos y
progress
extendidos
in
a nivel
more
nacional.
systematic
Pasala porque si no,
controls
no
in
voy
the
a
whole
llegar.
country. Next one, please.
A nivel de las intendencias departamentales
Concerning
también los
departmental
controles se realizan en la parte de
governments,
inspección y pueden
controls
ser
are
motivados por
done
denuncias o
through
también
inspections
hallazgos durante las
following
inspecciones de rutina, que
claims
no van
or
a
also
fiscalizar
findings
específicamente el rotulador
in
frontal, sino
routine
que miran
inspections.
el
They
mercado y donde
go and
pueden
check the
encontrarse con
market
incumplimientos.
and
Y el
find some
laboratorio también hace
non-compliance. The
análisis
laboratory also
que tienen que
does
ver con ya
testing
una lógica
that
no de
has to
riesgo,
do
sino que
with
se
not
usa
a
FRAX de
risk
acuerdo a la
logic,
matriz alimentaria y se
but
compara con la degradación de
according to
nutrientes. Seguimos más.
the food
En la
matrix
Intendencia de
and
Montevideo,
comparison with
siguiente,
the nutrient
publica
declaration.
periódicamente, también hoy,
Montevideo's government
publica periódicamente los
publishes,
resultados de los análisis. Estos son
regularly
datos abiertos.
publishes testing
Por
results.
ejemplo, en el
These
año
are open
2025,
data.
del total de
In
productos que incumplían
2025, out of all the
con los
products that
requisitos, había un
did not
0,5
comply with
incumplimientos que
requirements,
correspondía a
zero
rotulado frontal,
five had to
1,7% en
do
el
with
24 y un 4% en el
FOPL,
23. Dentro de los incumplimientos más
1.4
frecuentes
in
se encuentra la ausencia de
2024.
etiquetado frontal, ya
There
sea
was
por análisis
absence of
de laboratorio
FOPL,
o
for
por tabla
example,
nutricional.
or there
También hay
wasn't
presencia de
a food
etiquetado frontal que
analysis
no
or a
es
table of
correspondiente a la
nutrients.
norma
Also,
nacional.
FOPL did
Esto
not
tiene que ver con las
correspond to a national
importaciones y que el
standard,
producto se
and that
autoriza a
has
entrar
to
al
do
mercado, pero
with
pues no hay la
imports
certeza de que la
authorized in the
empresa va
market, but
luego
then the
a
company
cumplir con
does
todos los
not
requisitos en aquellos
necessarily
lotes que no son chequeados.
label is
Y
necessary.
dentro de los
And
productos se destacan los productos de
within the
bisutería,
products,
¿sí?
we
Y para
highlight
las tres advertencias,
cookies
tanto para sodio como para azúcares como
for
para
the
grasas.
three warnings,
Siguiente más.
sodium, sugar, and fats.
Ahí va. Bueno, lo mismo se
The
procede a la
same thing
intervención de la
goes
mercadería en puntos de ventas o
for
depósitos, y no
intervening
se hace
products in points of sale
movilización
and
de esos
warehouses,
productos y se retiran
and
del
we
mercado. Estos productos
call
que les puse
them
como ejemplo no
off
son
the
productos que hayan
market.
sido
These
sancionados, sino que
products
son productos
were
que
not
uno puede encontrar en el
sanctioned.
mercado
These are
interno.
products you can find in the
Y
market
bueno, y
and
hasta que no se
did not
rectifica, no
comply
se
until they
reetiqueta y la
do
empresa
not
pide el levantamiento de la intervención, no puede
relabel. They
volver a entrar
cannot
al
be
mercado.
sold in the
Dependiendo del
market.
incumplimiento, también se puede hacer una nueva extracción para ver si
And
se
depending on the
infringieron
non-compliance, we can also
los
do an
artículos.
extraction to see if
Siguiente
the
más.
non-compliances were corrected.
Y bueno, con respecto a lo que tiene que ver con las
And
sanciones,
regarding the sanctions,
el Ministerio de Salud tiene la
the
potestad
Ministry
de
of
aplicar
Health
sanciones que pueden
has the
ser
possibility of
económicas,
applying
ya van desde el
sanctions that can be
apercibimiento hasta la
economic.
clausura definitiva.
Uh,
Esto en el marco
they can
general
even
de las
go to
sanciones que
final
puede aplicar el
closing.
MSP. No
This is
específicamente al
in
rotulado
the
frontal, sino que se refiere a las
framework of what
facultades que tiene
MSP can
el MSP.
apply. MSP
Pero
has
la
different kinds of
realidad es que muchas veces
faculties,
las sanciones por
but the truth
incumplimiento
is
no
that
siempre se
uh,
efectivizan, sino que quedan muchas
sanctions due
veces en
to
intimaciones. Sí se han
non-compliance
aplicado sanciones,
often are
pero
not
no son la
applied,
mayoría de
but
las intervenciones que
sometimes they
terminan en
have been
sanciones
applied,
económicas,
but
que pueden
most
ir desde 20
interventions do
UR, que
not
son unos
finish in
$960,
economic
hasta más de 10 veces
sanctions.
más si hay
Economic
reincidencia.
sanctions can be
Siguiente.
$960 or more, or even 10 times more if
Y
the
bueno,
company repeats
entre los
the
desafíos capaz
non-compliance.
que consolidar una red
So
institucional para el
the
monitoreo con
challenges are
indicadores comunes
consolidating
y bueno, y establecer protocolos
network
más
with
ágiles de
common indicators
fiscalización
and
y sanción
establishing
con plazos
more
más
agile
definidos y mecanismos
protocols
públicos de seguimiento.
um,
Nosotros ahí creo que
and
tenemos un
public
gran debe.
mechanisms of
Yo
follow-up. I think that we
miraba
have a
la
big challenge
presentación
there. I was looking
de
at
la
the
colega de Perú y
presentation
cómo
from the
estos
Peruvian colleague
incumplimientos y
to see
sanciones
how
se
these
hacen públicos y me
non-compliances and
parece que
sanctions
eso
are done public.
seguramente
And I believe that this is
sanción reputacional tenga mucho
a
más peso
that a
que los
reputational
960
sanction
dólares que se le
has much
pueda
more weight
aplicar a
than
las empresas. Así que dejo por
$960.
acá porque no quiero ocupar más tiempo.
And I will stop
Gracias,
here
muchas
because I
gracias,
don't want to
Jimena.
take more time. Thank you
Por
very
el
much,
adelantado del
Jimena.
tiempo, no vamos a tener la oportunidad de tener preguntas, pero
We
quería
will not be
agradecer a
able to have
Jimena
any
también
questions
por
now because time is very short, but I wanted to
demostrar
thank Jimena for
una ventana
showing
más de oportunidad para el monitoreo y
another window of
fiscalización, que es en el caso los
opportunity
productos que
for
exigen el
monitoring and
registro, poder tener
inspection for the products that
este monitoreo en esta
need
puerta
to
de
have
entrada de los
registry and to be
productos en el
monitored in
mercado
these
y también los
entry
demás
points in the
mecanismos
market and
de
other
fiscalización
mechanisms and other
proactiva que
inspection
llevan
proactive
las
inspection
autoridades
mechanisms
para asegurar el
that the
cumplimiento
authorities in charge of to ensure the compliance of regulations
en Uruguay.
in
Creo
Uruguay.
que con eso tenemos
And I believe that
muchas
with that,
importantes lecciones
we have
para
many
seguir avanzando en nuestra
important
región.
lessons to
Y desde
continue
nuestra parte
moving
del
forward in
ODS
a
vamos a
region.
seguir apoyando a los
And at
países en esta
PAHO,
etapa de
we will
implementación
keep
y
supporting
cumplimiento,
countries
justamente porque
in
ya
this
varios países han pasado la etapa de
compliance
adopción.
stage because several
Todavía, como
countries
Jimena
have gone through
mencionó,
adoption. And as Jimena
el
mentioned,
diseño de la norma,
in
algunos países
the
que
design
están
of the
tratando de
norms, some
mejorar sus
countries are
normas,
trying to
mejorar sus
improve
aspectos, como
their
el tema
norms
del
in several
nutrientes, el
aspects,
tema del diseño gráfico, y
like, for
en eso
example, in terms
vamos,
of graphic design.
estamos
And we're going to
para seguir mejorando la protección que brindamos a nuestra población en la región de las
continuing,
Américas.
we're going
Pasamos
to continue
ahora
focusing on that in the region of the Americas. And now we will go
otra sesión de
to
nuestro
another session
webinario y
of
vamos
our webinar.
escuchar de
We're going
Mahmouda
to
Pasha. She is the
to
director of the
listen
WHO
to
Collaborating
Mahmoud
Center on Social Market for
Khalik.
Social Change at the University of South Florida, and she will present us on the compendium guide for applying social market to develop for the development of health interventions. So really stepping into the area of how can we improve and how can we develop better health interventions, particularly those that refer to social marketing in bringing the awareness of the importance of reduced salt intake, but also making that in ways that can be achievable for the populations. So over to you, Mahmouda. Thank you very much again for your participation.
All right, thank you so much. Let me share my screen and then we can get started. So I hope it's coming through. Yeah. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation to present on this work. What I am going to share is that we've been speaking a lot about, compliance and surveillance and looking at all of this work. And what I would like to do is frame my talk in the sense of once we do have these systems in place, how do our populations actually go about adopting these, the behaviors that we may have, the products that we may have, or the services that we do offer. And that is where I'm going to present to you this new product that our center was able to create in collaboration with the WHO and PAHO. So as we've been discussing, excess dietary sodium is a major modifiable risk factor contributing to hypertension, heart disease, and stroke. In response, the WHO and PAHO have prioritized sodium reduction as one of the cost-effective public health interventions, and many countries in the region have adopted structural measures and procurement standards. These policies are essential because they reshape the food environment at scale and reduce population exposure to high sodium products. However, experience across the region shows that policy adoption alone does not automatically translate into healthier behaviors or sustained reduction in salt intake. Consumers still make daily choices about cooking, purchasing, eating, and often within complex social, cultural, and economic contexts. Without complementary strategies to support the understanding, motivation, and skills, even the strongest policies may fall short of their intended health impact. This presentation is intentionally positioned between the discussion of the policy implementation and the health impact analysis to highlight the critical bridge between the two, which is behavior change. Social marketing provides a structured, evidence-based approach to ensuring that sodium reduction policies are understood, accepted, and acted upon by priority populations. By aligning policy goals with the lived realities of the communities, social marketing helps transform regulatory success into measurable health outcomes. So across the Americas, countries have made notable progress in adopting mandatory sodium reduction policies, including what we've seen, the front of label warning systems and reformulation.
Please.
Mahmouda,
Sorry?
Just the feedback from the translators. They're asking you if you could speak a little bit slower.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right. Despite the advances, an implementation gap frequently emerges at the community and individual levels. This gap is often characterized by limited capacity to design and deliver behavior change interventions that complement the policy measures. Common challenges include low health literacy, confusion between salt and sodium, cultural norms around taste and cooking practices, and competing commercial influences that favor high sodium products. Traditional health communication approaches often rely on information and dissemination alone, and they have often been proven to be insufficient to address the barriers that we see. So evidence from the regional experience demonstrates that awareness does not necessarily lead to action, particularly when healthier choices are perceived as costly, inconvenient, and culturally inappropriate. This implementation gap is further widened by constraints of human and financial resources that exist within the ministries of health, and also limited access to practical tools and uncertainty about how to operationalize behavior change frameworks in the real world settings. So this social marketing compendium that I am going to speak about today was developed specifically to address this gap by documenting the full arc of intervention planning from problem definition to monitoring and evaluation using real country examples. By doing so, it responds to the clear demand from countries for actionable guidance that goes beyond policy design and into practical implementation. Understanding this gap is essential for appreciating the value of the compendium as a tool that strengthens the link between policy intent and population impact in sodium reduction efforts. So now what I'm going to do is share with you information related to what this compendium looks like, but also the framework that it expands upon. So before I share that more about the compendium, I do want to take a moment to introduce my institution and our center to frame this work. So social marketing at the University of South Florida has a very long history. USF has been at the forefront of social marketing research applied to public health for decades. Based on this work, we were recognized and designated as a World Health Organization Collaborating Center in 2014 and redesignated in 2018 and 2022. To date, we have collaborated with the WHO and PAHO on several projects investigating the use of social marketing. The PAHO WHO Collaborating Center for Social Marketing and Social Change to address non-communicable diseases based at USF was established to support countries in building capacity for effective behavior change interventions. As a collaborating center, its mandate aligns closely with PAHO and WHO priorities, particularly in addressing NCD risk factors such as unhealthy diets, physical inactivity, tobacco use, and harmful use of alcohol. We have focused much of our work in the past 10 years on efforts related to sodium reduction and, most importantly, in building capacity and providing technical assistance on the use of social marketing. Over the past several years, the center has worked in partnership with PAHO to develop and deliver the social marketing program for public health, which has reached more than 20,000 participants across the region through a self-paced online courses. The tutor-led implementation of this particular program involved multidisciplinary country teams, generated valuable practical experiences in applying social marketing principles to real public health challenges, such as sodium reduction. The development of the social marketing compendium as led by the center was a way to document these experiences, consolidate the lessons learned, and provide countries with practical reference that complement the formal training. So the social marketing compendium, the cover page as shown here, is designed as a practical and applied guide for public health practitioners that work within the country setting. This compendium documents the complete planning arc of social marketing interventions from problem definition to monitoring and evaluation, using SALT reduction as the primary focus. The guide draws directly from the tutor-led implementation of the social marketing program for public health, and it showcases real case studies from countries and territories in the region. There's step-by-step explanations and examples of decision-making processes, as well as templates that public health practitioners can adapt their own context. Most importantly, the compendium does not prescribe a single solution or a campaign model. Instead, it emphasizes flexibility, audience-centered design, and contextual adaptation. It is also not a substitute for regulatory action or surveillance systems. Rather, it is intended to complement existing policies by strengthening the behavior change component that support the policy effectiveness. So as I'm speaking here, there may be questions by some in the audience as to, well, what exactly is social marketing? Social marketing is the application of commercial marketing principles to influence behaviors that benefit individuals and society as a whole. In the public health context, its primary objective is voluntary behavior change, not profit or product sales. So some of the key characteristics of social marketing include a clear behavioral focus, an audience-centered approach, the use of research, and the strategic application of the marketing mix, which includes product, price, place, and promotion. Social marketing also emphasizes exchange, meaning that an intervention must offer benefits that the audience perceives as outweighing the cost or barriers to change. Additionally, it considers competition, meaning what are the unhealthy behaviors that are competing with the healthier alternatives that take up people's time, attention, and resources. For the topic of sodium reduction, social marketing helps to translate abstract health recommendations into practical, appealing actions such as choosing lower sodium products, modifying cooking practices, or using nutrition labels more effectively. By grounding the interventions in audience insight and systematically addressing the barriers, social marketing increases the likelihood that the behavior change will occur and will be sustained over time. At the core of the compendium that you will have access to is the introduction to social marketing, but then also the social marketing framework that is used as a guide for practitioners through the design, implementation, and evaluation of health interventions. Visualizing this framework as a sequence of interconnected steps helps that public health practitioner understand how each phase builds on the previous one and why skipping steps can undermine effectiveness. The framework's inclusion in the compendium provides country teams with a clear roadmap for operationalizing behavior change in support of sodium reduction policies. This roadmap begins with a clear problem statement and the selection of a specific behavioral focus informed by the social ecological model of health. It then moves to audience segmentation or the selection of a priority population. Following the selection of the audience, it moves to the aspect of conducting research to generate audience insights, which are then used to develop an integrated marketing strategy related to the topic that is being addressed. The framework at the end continues with sharing information about how to pre-test materials to refine messages before they're delivered to the public, and then also planning for implementation and monitoring and evaluation so that you can translate the strategy into action. So one of the other key components beyond just informing the countries about what is social marketing and the framework is actually giving practical guidance in terms of how have other countries used this information. So one of the strengths of this compendium is its use of a detailed country case study to illustrate how the social marketing framework is being applied in practice. So we include in this framework examples from Aruba, St. Martin, as well as 14 other countries, and demonstrate how these country teams identified their audiences, selected a behavior, and how they went about designing their interventions that aligned with the local context. So in the case of Aruba, as the images show here, for instance, the intervention targeted working women in a hospitality sector and focused on reducing salt use in home cooking and workplace meals. The strategy combined workplace engagement, chef demonstrations, media outreach, and practical tools such as recipe books. So the intention behind sharing the case studies are to highlight common challenges that public health practitioners will face, such as you may not have access to baseline data, or there may not be information pertaining to how the population understands salt or sodium. So in sharing some of these challenges, we also work to address practical solutions. So how can you use proxy data, and how can you use other messages that other countries have developed as a way to tackle this issue? So by presenting both the successes and the lessons learned in the compendium, it enables countries to anticipate challenges and adapt their strategies based on regional experiences rather than starting from zero. So the compendium is designed to be immediately actionable, so countries who are sitting on this call can actually begin applying its guidance. And so some two immediate steps that I have for you to share is one, you can visit the PAHO virtual campus to access the social marketing for public health curriculum. It is a self-paced curriculum. I have shared the link here as well as a QR code that you can use as a way to access this curriculum. Second, you can download the compendium guide as a complement to this online curriculum to understand how others in the region have used it. And so once again, I've shared a QR code here for you to be able to download this curriculum and use. These steps will provide a manageable entry point for countries at different stages of policy implementation and capacity, enabling them to align behavior change efforts with existing sodium reduction initiatives. So I think we're at time now, are we?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So I will move on to my last slide. The last slide is basically, I would like to continue this conversation. So as country teams do download the curriculum or in the compendium, if there are comments or questions or collaboration, I encourage you to reach out to me and my information here, as well as others on the team. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mahmouda. And I think it's really great to hear and share with colleagues here the opportunities that we've developed together in establishing these resources that can help countries moving from awareness to real changes and actions that can be translated in effective improvements for the health of our population. So we really appreciate your presentation and the collaboration that we have so far, and will continue to do so. Next, in our webinar today is our a colleague from the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation in Brazil, Eduardo Nilson. He's a researcher, and he will present us on the health impact analysis of sodium reduction policies, more precisely on the epidemiological and the economic modeling of the impact of these sodium reduction policies in the Americas. So thank you, Eduardo, for your participation, and the floor is yours now. Thank you.
Firstly, thank you very much, Fabio, for the introduction, and for you and Luis actually for sharing, trusting me to run this study. And I'll start by sharing my presentation here. So here it is. Uh, I'll speak about an epidemiological and economic modeling of sodium reduction policies in some countries of the Americas. But first, our general rationale is, of course, knowing that excessive dietary sodium is a primary driver for elevated blood pressure, and that has serious consequences on cardiovascular disease risk. And the two policies that we modeled were the updated PAHO regional sodium targets through some published studies that we have in scientific literature, and also front of pack labeling through mandatory consumer warning labels, especially the octagons in specific countries, so we could assess the changes in sodium consumption and then the consequences to health. And moving forward very quickly, just for you to understand how the modeling was made, the rationale, and even to understand better when you're reading any studies on modeling, it's important to understand that we have several inputs that need to be available for the country, like population data, health parameters, economic parameters, and within this health parameters, we can have mortality, morbidity, exposure to risk factor, and relative risks that come from meta-analysis from literature. And we can use several different approaches to understand what will happen as a consequence of changing these risk factors, the exposure. So having the burden of disease, which is very important in the first place, to know how many deaths, how many costs are attributable to a certain risk factor, but also assessing different scenarios. If we change this risk factor exposure through a policy, for example, through changes in consumer behavior and other changes, what will happen in terms of the outputs, which can be deaths, which could be disease, the burden of disease in general, and also the costs, the economic consequences of changing the exposure. And the economic modeling is actually a consequence of the epidemiological modeling, because we use the cases and deaths and the impact fraction that comes from the epidemiology to assess what are the consequences in terms of direct and indirect costs. Direct costs are those costs that are directly related to the treatment of health, all the health outcomes that are related to that risk factor, and the indirect costs are societal costs that implicate, for example, the costs of premature deaths, the costs of Social Security, um, retirement and licenses and everything, and product in terms of losses of productivity to absenteeism and presenteeism. So there are many aspects that can be assessed here as long as there's data available. And here's a general overview of what we were assessing through the PRIME, which is the Preventable Risk Integrated Model that was developed by University of Oxford. So we assess dietary sodium intake and link that to the exposure, so we can have changes in the intake will lead to changes in blood pressure, and blood pressure is related to all of these cardiovascular diseases, which include coronary heart disease, stroke, hypertensive heart disease, aortic aneurysm, rheumatic heart disease. So we try to assess all of these outcomes by changing dietary factors. Here's just just for an idea of what the formulas that are used, the rationale behind it. It's the same methodology that's used by the Global Burden of Disease, the GBD. So we can move forward by having both the overall burden, which is the population attributable fraction, here at the left and the lower part of the slide, and above it we have the PIF, which is the potential impact fraction, which is actually assessing changes in exposure, whether they would lead in terms of the impact or the percentage of deaths, the percentage of costs, the percentage of incidents, and whatever that we may have, and as a consequence. And of course, the economic core, we only addressed one type of indirect cost, which is the cost of premature deaths, which is calculated through the human capital method, which is in general, it just assesses the losses of productivity that are related to a premature death. So that person would belong to the economically active population and would have the whole future ahead of it, of these people, in terms of the richness they will produce in the country. So we try to assess the cost of this all through the lifespan until the age of retirement. And in general, the policy intervention will be like this. We will change policy implementation will change consumption. So and also food composition of the foods. As for example, setting mandatory targets will lead to changes in food composition by reducing the sodium content of foods, but also we will have front of pack labeling, changing consumer behavior. So as a consequence, we will have less intake so less sodium intake in the population. And response to that will be physiological in terms of reducing blood pressure, and that will lead to less cases and less deaths from cardiovascular disease, and also less costs in terms of human losses in terms of human capital. And moving forward to the results, that's I think it's the most important part that we are going to speak about. We chose 5 different countries selected because we have because of the existence of studies that we could use for the modeling, and also as working in Brazil as a researcher, I have access to dietary survey microdata, so I use that also here. So that's why Brazil we have both the targets and the front of pack labeling. But we included Canada and the United States also for front of pack label, Chile too. It is important to stress that Chile, the others are more theoretical analysis estimates, but in terms of Chile, it was an actual real world impact that was evaluated. And now Fabio has presented before, we have information from Mexico that I look forward to analyzing as well and including that in the future study. And we use targets also for Mexico. Like if we changed all targets in the countries to a maximum of the benchmarks that were set by PAHO, what would happen in terms of food composition, and then to what would happen in sodium consumption in the population. So this is just an overview of the studies that we have, those we have in literature, the expected impact of implementing the PAHO targets in Mexico. In Brazil, they're not published data, but the expected changes in food composition modeled into the dietary survey in the country. We have other modeling studies that were led by my dear colleague Nadia Flexner, both in Canada and the US. So we they use this model data that she used for having this in Brazil, in both Canada and the United States for 2023. And finally, in Chile, as I said, we have real life changes that were in terms of food purchases after food labeling and front of pack labeling. And in terms of Brazil, we used model data that in terms of what would be expected in terms of changes in food purchases. And as a consequence, what would happen in terms of sodium consumption in the population. And finally, the results. I think it's very important for us to see that there is a huge impact in all countries. This is, of course, it's a function of when we're speaking of targets, for example, the more ultra-processed food that we have in the population, the larger will be the impact. So although Brazil has a larger population than Mexico, ultra-processed food consumption, processed food consumption is higher in Mexico. So the burden is higher, and as a consequence, the outcomes of reducing sodium intake will be larger in Mexico. It would close to 12,000 deaths, but that could be avoided per year. And while in Brazil, it's still huge, it's 7.5 thousand, and that would also mean a huge economic impact in terms of these international dollars and price purchase parity of $112 million in Mexico that could be saved in terms of productivity. In Brazil, 87 million. So it really shows how the top PAHO targets could yield tens of millions of dollars in terms of economic preservation, and also tens of thousands of deaths in the countries too. And it's important to also to see that we have a difference in terms of the health impact in terms of sex. Of course, males are the ones that consume most salt. They're the ones that die more from cardiovascular diseases too. So that's why the impact is much larger among men. And to stress that we have a huge impact in terms of coronary heart disease and stroke. So these are the main causes of death among the cardiovascular disease, and also of cost to health systems and to society. So it's very important when we prevent them. And in the real world for Chile, we have this reduction that was measured in terms of not only sodium, but also calories. So it's important that when we're speaking of front of pack labeling, we're only assessing the impact of sodium reduction, but we know that there will be impact in terms of fat reduction, in terms of the consumption of fats, the consumption of sugars. So the impact is much higher. So this is only the deaths that are prevented by reducing sodium, but it's already a huge economic impact that we will have. And of course, we know that there's no silver bullet for sodium reduction. So that means that we need many policies working together to have a higher impact. In North America, on the other end, we studied the front of pack labeling, and the impact is very huge also because we have more than 1,000 lives saved in Canada and 22,000 deaths in the United States, and that would convert to $27 million in terms of cost reduction from premature mortality in Canada, and over $1.2 billion, which is a huge number, in the United States. So it shows that really it's very impactful, and the same happens in Brazil. We will have the updated PAHO targets will, as I showed before, 7.5 thousand deaths, and we have front of pack labeling only by assessing the changes in sodium consumption would lead to almost 2,000 deaths of saved in per year, and over 100 million reais if we add them both in terms of the impact. So it is both an epidemiological case, but also a very important economic case because we're only assessing one part of the economic burden. But if we include all of the health, the cost to health systems and other indirect costs, it will be much higher, certainly. And I'd just like to end adding something that has to do with the shake package that was launched earlier this year, just to show the importance. Here's another study that I led with colleagues from the University of Liverpool to show that the differences between several strategies implemented in Brazil, projecting the impact until 2038, showing the differences that we already have in Brazil, like looking at the glass half full, we have voluntary limits, which are status quo, but we could do much better in terms of preventing deaths and having savings to the economy if we implemented mandatory front of pack labelings, and if we have including the mandatory limits front of pack labeling, if it was improved, as Fabio has shown before, we have several problems in the Brazilian model, and both in terms of design, but also not applying the PAHO nutritional profile. So that could be improved in terms of the impact. And finally, I think that there's a final policy that was presented by the Shake 2.0 edition, which is including the use of salt substitutes, which would have a huge impact. But it's the highest impact, as a matter of fact, in Brazil, leading to 63,000 deaths prevented in the period. So it's more than a tenfold impact than we have compared to the voluntary targets that we have at the moment. So it's very important for us to address that, especially in countries as Brazil, but other Latin American countries which have discretionary salt as very important source of sodium. And I will end by taking the takeaways for you that the economic and epidemiological evidence is very conclusive, and these policies are all aligned with the Shake 2.0 technical package, and we will also have a huge impact in terms of salt substitutes. The folks from the Georgia Institute, which is the WHO Collaborating Center for Salt Reduction, were kind to share some numbers that they haven't published yet, in the process of publication, but to show what would the impact of using salt substitutes in the region would be very huge. Just to make an idea, we'll have almost 300,000 deaths could be prevented in the Americas if salt substitutes were used. And that would include having 1.2 million non-fatal cases of stroke and heart attack per year, and also kidney disease. And considering only discretionary salt, which is important for Brazil and other countries in our region, that would mean 131,000 deaths and over 500,000 non-fatal cases of stroke. So we do need to think about multiple policies, and including, and of course, evolving what we have in terms of the policies in Brazil, especially, but in other countries, we need to move forward to to achieve our goals for 2030, and also by applying to all of the World Shake 2.0 technical passages, the messages. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. Really important pieces of evidence that being produced in our region to not only help us understand the potential impact of these policies, but also help our ministers of health, civil society organizations, UN agencies in making clear how important it is to adopt and implement those.
Es Fabio que quedó
Ya,
frisado.
pensé que era yo.
Well, I thought it was me, but it's Fabio. Fabio needs to reconnect. Perhaps we can
A la siguiente.
go to the next
Muchísimas
presentation.
gracias,
Thank you very
Eduardo,
much,
por tu
Eduardo,
presentación.
for your
Por favor, si
presentation.
hay preguntas,
Please, if there are any
colocarlas en
questions,
la caja que
please.
tenemos de Q&A,
We have a
porque
Q&A
desafortunadamente por el
box
tiempo
for
no vamos
that.
a tener la oportunidad de
Unfortunately, due to
hacerlas
time, we
en
won't
vivo,
uh,
pero bueno, vamos
be
a
able
pasar
to
con
do
la
it live,
siguiente
but we'll
sesión. Ahora vamos a
address
tener
your
un panel
questions to the
específicamente para discutir
lecturers.
sobre
Now
los
we'll have a
estudios
panel to
de
discuss
caso
about
sobre la
the
implementación de metas de
case
contenido de
study
sodio
on
en
implementing
Colombia, ¿no? Y
targets
tenemos un panel
on
de lujo.
sodium content in
Digamos un
Colombia.
poco
We have a
que,
great
o a
panel.
manera de introducción, me permito
Uh,
compartirles que
I'd
la
like to
OPS
share
está
with you the fact
apoyando
that
a
PAHO
Colombia
is
en la
supporting
implementación de
Colombia
las metas
in
de contenido de
implementing
sodio, particularmente
sodium
a través
content
de 4
targets
áreas.
in
De
4
analizar el contenido de
areas:
sodio en productos
analyzing
procesados
sodium
y
content in
ultraprocesados,
processed and ultra-processed
de
products,
analizar encuestas de consumo de
analyzing
alimentos para identificar cuáles son
food
las principales
consumption surveys
fuentes
to
de
identify the
sodio,
main
de
sodium
desarrollar un
sources,
protocolo para implementar una encuesta de
developing
consumo
a
de sodio
protocol to
utilizando
implement
prescripción
a
urinaria
survey on
y
sodium
de desarrollar también el estudio de caso
consultation
como
concern
tal sobre la
in
implementación de metas de sodio. Y para
urine
este panel
tests,
me permito
and
invitar
also
a nuestros panelistas de lujo.
implementation of the
Tenemos de
sodium
parte del
targets.
Ministerio de Salud y
We have the
Protección Social
Ministry
de
of Health and
Colombia, a
Social
Pamela
Protection of
Vallejo.
Colombia,
Ella nos acompaña
represented
del
by
Grupo de
Pamela
Alimentación
Vallejo.
y
She's
Nutrición
from the
de
group
la
of
Dirección de Promoción y Prevención.
Nutrition
También
in
nos
Food in
acompaña
the
Gustavo
Promotion and
Cediel. Él
Prevention
es docente
Directorate.
e
We also have
investigador de la
Gustavo
Escuela
Cediel. He's a
de Nutrición
professor
y
and
Dietética
researcher
de la
at the
Universidad de
School
Antioquia,
of
Colombia.
Nutrition
Y
and
desde casa nos acompaña Luis Galicia, nuestro consultor
of
internacional
the
de la
University
Unidad
of
de Factores de
Colombia, and Luis
Riesgo en
Galicia from
Nutrición
the
del
Unit
Departamento de
of
Enfermedades Crónicas No
Risk
Transmisibles
and
y Salud Mental
Nutrition
de la
Factors
OPS. Así
of
que, bueno, sin más, le paso la
PAHO.
palabra a
With no
Pamela.
more to say, I
Vamos a
pass the
poner
floor to
el tiempo para que nos
Pamela.
des de favor
We'll
que
set
se
the
ajusten
time,
al tiempo.
so
Y a
please
los
adjust the
participantes y las
time.
participantes, recuerden
Participants
poner sus
need
preguntas en
to
la caja de
um,
Q&A que tenemos
ask their
para poderlas
questions in the
contestar.
Q&A
Adelante.
box, so they're answered after
Buenos
this
días
meeting.
para todos
Good
y
morning,
todas. Gracias por la
everybody. Thank
invitación.
you for your
De parte de la
invitation.
subdirectora les enviamos
On
afectuoso
behalf
saludo.
of our
Gracias a mis anteriores
under director,
ayudantes con las conferencias. Creo que nos da un contexto general
and
del
thanks to the
impacto
other
de cada
lectures,
proyecto
we can see the
en
general
condiciones
impact
de
all
política
these
pública para la
interventions on
reducción de
public
sodio.
policies can have
Si quieres,
for sodium reduction.
Luis, ¿me puedes compartir las
Luis,
diapositivas?
can
Porque
you
no las
share
estoy
my
viendo
slides, please? I don't see
en
my
pantalla.
slides. I don't see
¿Pueden
them
ver mi
on the
pantalla, los
screen.
demás?
No
Can
se
you
ve
see
una
my screen?
línea
No, we see a
blanca
white line, a
vertical.
white vertical line.
¿Ahora?
Ahora sí.
Can you see it now? Yeah.
Bueno,
Well,
inicialmente quería contarles
the
que
first
en
thing to
Colombia,
tell
pues
you
como en la
is
mayoría de los países,
that
la
in
reducción de esta ola de
Colombia,
muertes
as in many countries, the main death causes have to do with non-communicable diseases. We have cardiovascular diseases and particularly stroke. We also have diabetes mellitus and cancer, among others. We have also seen, as other lecturers have said, that the excessive consumption of sodium is the main. Can you hear me? I hear her perfectly. So excessive consumption of sodium is the main risk factor for high blood pressure. And that's a large contributor to cardiovascular diseases. In 2023, 2,771 deaths are attributable to excessive salt consumption. This means sodium consumption is very relevant as a risk factor in non-communicable diseases. In Colombia, sodium consumption is quite high. We see it is one of the highest in the region, 3.92 grams of sodium. And we know that the WHO recommendation is 2 grams. So in Colombia, we are duplicating or doubling this recommendation. In Colombia, we have 1.5 grams as a recommendation as well. So it's almost 3 times as much what we have in the ingestion of Colombian population. And this recommendation is even lower for children or the elderly. So we have a problem in terms of sodium consumption in the country. Thank you. The following one, please. Having said this, we started our regulatory process on sodium targets. As has been shown before, high sodium consumption not only has an impact on health, but also severe effects in our economy and in our healthcare systems. We evaluated 3 alternatives: the status quo, that is not doing anything vis-a-vis the problem, then regulation, and then educational campaigns. We found that the regulation alternative is the highest in terms of cost benefit. It has costs for the industry that are important because they have to make changes in their formulations. However, the great benefit it has is that it decreases chronic diseases and generates productivity and other economic benefits. Therefore, this regulatory impact analysis tells us that the best alternative for the country was regulating sodium contents. Next one. When we analyzed the problem, we found that among the dietary sources of sodium, we see that sodium consumption is much higher in processed and ultra-processed foods, as we see here on the screen. We have sodium in natural foods, that's native sodium, but if you compare a hot sauce in comparison to hot chili pepper, we see it has 2,200 milligrams and 100 grams of product, but the hot chili pepper only has 7 milligrams. So what does the industry do? As from this raw material, there are many additives and lots of salt. This increases the amount of sodium excessively. The same thing goes to, for example, a chicken leg versus some sausages, or a hot dog. And the same thing goes, the same comparison can be between corn, for example, in laminated cereal, and you can see that it comes from ultra-processed and processed foods. Next one. Based upon what I said, we formulated the national strategy for reducing the consumption of salt, sodium in Colombia. We wanted to contribute to decreasing high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease. One of our interventions was regulating sodium contents, but we also had other regulations like information, education, and communication, the gastronomic industry, also institutional providers. Our target was to reach the WHO target as well. So as to establish our resolution target, we reviewed the most consumed foods in 2010 through the nutritional survey. And we found the foods that had the highest sodium content. We defined categories and subcategories of foods. We took photographs of labels of packages in the market. We got 462 data, 2,462 data, and we did an analysis to establish targets and terms. We also had roundtables with producers, government, the academia. We had CDC from Atlanta as allies and so on. This is an example of how we established our target. This is a statistical analysis of 3 product categories. Cheese. The first one is farmer's cheese, the other one is pasteurized cheese, and the third one is spreadable cheese. You have the average, the lower limit, and the lowest limit and the highest limit. We decided the target one would be in the average, and the higher limit would have to reduce their sodium content to technologically feasible targets. We had target 1 and target 2. We found products with a lower sodium content in this same category. That meant that the industry could do this reduction. The regulatory process has different stages in Colombia. First of all, we do the regulatory impact analysis, then we have a public consultation that occurred in 2017. We had an international consultation in 2019 also. We did procedures before the Industry and Commerce organization. Then we do competency or competition advocacy, and then drafted the regulation for sodium consumption. In 2020, we issued Resolution 2013 with 2 gradual targets, one for 22 and another one for 2024. The idea is to reduce these contents in 59 products in bread, cookies and crackers, sausages, sauces, dressings, soups, dehydrated base and cream snacks, fats, breakfast cereals, cheese, and also canned sardines. And this is because we found high contents in several of these products that have very high one, like for example, sauces and also dressings. Finally, I show you here one of the results we had. This is an article that was published last year between 2015 and 2024. We reached a significant reduction in the group of foods analyzed out. Well, it's from 779 milligrams of sodiums to 325. It's very high in bakery and snacks, a very high reduction in bakery and snacks. And as you see, we have soups, dehydrated bases showed also an important decrease between 2015 and 2024. We hope these nutritional profiles in Colombia comply with sodium targets. And we also expect effects in blood, hypertension, and cardiovascular diseases. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation, Pamela. Thank you for giving us this, for making this review on the process of reviewing and adopting sodium reduction targets in Colombia. Gustavo will tell us about this process to identify the main sodium diet sources in the Colombian population. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you very much, PAHO, for inviting us to this forum and also to accompany us in this process of sodium reduction in the country. I think that's why we reached the changes shown by Pamela. What I'll show you is a project we developed with the PAHO country office. The idea was to identify the main diet sources of sodium in the Colombian population, including foods and ultra-processed foods. We know a lot, I think, and we have talked a lot about why to reduce sodium and the related diseases. I just want to add that given the change of food patterns in Colombia, we have to try to find where that sodium comes from. Food patterns have changed in Colombia to ultra-processed foods, unfortunately. So we need to know how these products contribute with sodium to Colombian diets. We know that the sale of these products has increased in the Americas, but also in other foods. So our objective is to identify the main diet sources of sodium in the Colombian population, including, according to the NOAA classification, nature, extension, and purpose of industrial food processing. We did so through two national surveys, one in 2005 and another one in 2015. I'll explain the methodology very briefly and pass you the results. What we got here was that we divided the sodium content in percentage, where sodium is distributed among Colombian population between 2005 and 2015. Blue is 2005, orange is 2015. We have natural foods according to the last guide on food for real, concerning real food among Colombian population, culinary ingredients, processed foods in the end, and ultra processed products both for eating and drinking. The biggest contribution of sodium in the 2 years occurs as from ultra processed consumption, ultra processed product consumption, 42.8% of sodium and 42.1% in 2005 and 2015. A relevant piece of information. The second group is processed foods, between 18 and 19% in 2005 and 2015. Among natural foods, it's mostly meats and particularly offal. And as Pamela said, there's a sodium contribution in natural foods over 10% of requirements. So this is something we need to take into account. The source of sodium in culinary ingredients looks low, but I think it is underestimated. Perhaps consumption of salt is underestimated here. I am not going to say much here. We have absolute values and relative values. I'd just like to say that in absolute terms, another important result is that there was an increase in sodium consumption between 2005 and 2015 in Colombia in natural foods from 207 to 291, and in processed foods from 415 to 515. This is different from what the Ministry of Health shows, which is more recent data. Therefore, it's important to have FOPL, and there's a law in Colombia that promotes FOPL. We acknowledge that there are processed and ultra-processed foods with an excess of sodium. We did an analysis with 2015 data concerning distribution of these products among the population. More than 80% of the Colombian population consumed at least one product with sodium excess in 2015, and 15% did not consume these products. This is an important magnitude of consumption of processed and ultra-processed food with excessive content of sodium. 20% one product, 14% two I'm sorry, 13% just one product, 26 two, 22 3, 14 4, and 20 more than 5. Those that consumed at least one product with an excessive content of sodium was 86% compared to this group that didn't consume this product. The result was the following. In red, we have citizens in Colombia who consumed at least one product with sodium excess, and green, those who didn't. And the dotted lines are WHO sodium consumption recommendations. According to the age bracket, these are citizens that consumed at least one product with excessive content of sodium that is much more than the recommendations. The group that did not consume, of course, complied with recommendations. Then we did analysis on prevalence of excessive consumption of sodium in total diet, and this correlates with the former group, the group that consumed products with an excessive consumption of sodium had prevalence as compared to those who didn't consume. It was much higher. This means 3 to 4 times a higher probability of having a high sodium diet when we consume at least one product with excessive content of sodium. What does this mean? I summarize here according to data shown here. Processed and particularly ultra-processed foods, as the Ministry of Health is showing, are the ones that contribute with most sodium to the Colombian population. Snacks and processed meats, the largest contribution, and this is why the Ministry of Health showed the table, and processed foods have the least content. I finish here. When we divide the population between those who consumed one more product with excessive sodium content as compared to that didn't consume these products, we can realize that there is a risk of 3 to 4 more times of having a diet with excessive sodium content among these people. This means that not consuming products with an excess in sodium guarantees compliance with WHO recommendations concerning sodium consumption. So this study is telling us that we have to follow WHO recommendations and also Colombian recommendations based our nutrition in natural foods, moderate use of salt table, processed foods, and avoid ultra-processed foods completely, as the Ministry of Health said in its resolution proposal. Thank you very
Muchas
much.
gracias, Gustavo. Pues de ahí, ¿no? La importancia de tener este
Thank you
tipo
very
de
much,
análisis
Gustavo.
para
It is so
poder
important to have these
conocer
kinds of
primero cuáles son las
analysis to
principales
be able
fuentes
to
de
know
sodio,
what are
de
the
consumo
best,
en la
the
población y
main
después
sources of
definir
sodium in the
las
population,
metas.
and then
Y
define
bueno,
the
ahora
targets.
para cerrar
And
este
now,
panel le
to
voy a pasar
close
la
this
palabra a mi
panel, I'm
compañero
going to
Luis
give the
para que nos
floor to my
comparta sobre
colleague
qué fue este
Luis
estudio de
so that
caso
he
sobre la
can
implementación de las metas de
share
contenido
on
de sodio
this
en Colombia.
case
Adelante,
study
Luis.
on sodium
Gracias,
consumption
Leslie. ¿Pueden
targets
ver mi
in Colombia.
presentación?
Thank you, Leslie. Can you
No,
see my
otra vez se
presentation?
ve cortada. Déjame,
No,
te comparto pantalla.
it's choppy again.
Bien, gracias, Leslie. Bueno, como mencionaba Leslie al inicio
As
del
I was
panel,
saying,
la OPS está
Leslie, at the
apoyando
beginning
a
of the
Colombia
panel, as I
el
said at the beginning of the
análisis de la
panel, PAHO
implementación de
is
las metas de
supporting
contenido de
Colombia
sodio. Y en este marco se realizó un
regarding the
estudio de caso
implementation
sobre la
of sodium
implementación de las
consumption
metas. La
targets,
siguiente, por
and
favor.
we carried out a study on the
Voy a
targets.
pasar muy rápidamente
I'm
en las
going to go
primeras,
very
en los
quickly through the
antecedentes, luego
first
describir la metodología, algunos resultados
pages, and then I'm
preliminares
going
y
to describe
conclusiones
the methodology,
preliminares
some
también.
preliminary
La
results,
siguiente.
and some preliminary conclusions as well. Next, please.
Bien, esto lo pasaré muy rápidamente. Como
I'm going to go
sabemos,
very
ya
quickly through
Eduardo
this.
lo indicó muy claramente en su
Eduardo
presentación.
already
La
talked about
sal
this in his
contribuye a
presentation.
hipertensión,
Salt
enfermedades
contributes
cardiovasculares
with
y otras
hypertension,
enfermedades no transmisibles.
cardiovascular diseases, and other
Siguiente.
non-communicable diseases.
Ahí síguele dando hasta que salgan todas y pasamos a la siguiente.
Continue clicking until we have the
El
next
consumo de
ones,
sal en
please.
las Américas.
As
Sabemos que
salt
la
consumption in
mayoría
the
o todos los
Americas, we
países
know
están por
that
encima de la recomendación de
most
la
countries are
OMS
above
y
the
en las
PAHO
estimaciones de la
recommendation,
OMS, el
WHO
consumo de
recommendation,
sal en
sorry.
Colombia sería de
And
11,79
in Colombia, the
gramos
consumption
por
is
día en personas adultas,
11.79
que es
grams
el máximo
in
consumo
adult persons,
de la
which is the
región y es más
maximum
del
consumption
doble
in the
de lo que
region. So this is
recomienda la
more
OMS.
than double than
Siguiente.
what WHO recommends. Next, please.
También hay beneficios sanitarios y económicos
There are
de reducir el
also
consumo de sodio. Ya también
sanitary
Eduardo
and
lo
economic
indicaba,
benefits
pero
in
hay
reducing
una
sodium
reducción de un
consumption.
30%, una
There
reducción de un
was
30%, que la
a
meta de la
30%
OMS
reduction. This
podría
is
salvar
the
40 millones de
WHO
vidas
target. It could save
a
40
nivel
millions
mundial
of
en un
lives
periodo
at
de
a world
25
level
años.
in a
Y los programas de
25-year
reducción del
period.
consumo de
And the
sodio
programs for
producen
the
un retorno
reduction
de la
of
inversión
sodium
de 13 a
consumption reduce a
18
return in
dólares por cada dólar
investment
invertido.
in 13
Siguiente.
to $18 for each dollar invested.
principalmente en países de ingresos altos, del 70-80% de la
In
sal
high-income
consumida para
countries,
el asado
70 to
proviene de
80% of
productos
salt
procesados
consumed
y
by the
ultraprocesados,
population
aunque
comes
esto
from
también es una
processed and
realidad
ultra-processed
para
products, although
muchos de los
this is
países de ingresos
also a
medios y
reality
altos, como
for
la mayoría
low
de
and
países de
middle-income
América
countries like
Latina.
countries
En
in Latin
actualidad, este
America
estudio realizado por la OPS
and
no
the
se incluye
Caribbean.
el dato
This
de
study
Colombia,
carried out
da
by
cuenta de
PAHO that
esto y
includes data
también
from
da cuenta
Colombia
del aumento de las
shows this,
ventas de
and
estos
also it shows
productos
the increase of
y su
the sales
impacto
of these
en
products
la
and their
disponibilidad de
impact
sodio en el
in
mercado.
sodium
Siguiente.
availability in the market.
En esta
Next, please.
gráfica que proviene de ese estudio también vemos la densidad de
In this
sodio en
graph,
estos
we
productos
also see
ultraprocesados
sodium
y ahí damos
density
cuenta
in
de que el
these ultra-processed
63% de
processed
ellos
products,
tenían
and
un exceso de
63% of them
sodio y que la
had an excess of
mayoría
sodium, and
del sodio
most
que se aporta
of
en
the
estos
sodium
productos
in
proviene
these products
principalmente de
comes
salsas y
mainly
aderezos,
from
galletas y panes
sauces,
industriales,
dressings,
que eso es lo que también nos comentaba
crackers, and
Pamela en su
industrial bread,
presentación.
which is something
Siguiente,
that
por favor.
Pamela was saying in her presentation.
La OPS apoya a sus Estados miembros en la aplicación del paquete técnico SHAKE llamado
PAHO
Salma Salud, como lo
supports
mencionaba
its
Vanessa al
member
inicio de
states in
esta
the application
presentación de
of
este
the
webinar.
Shake technical package, as
Hace 2
Vanessa was
días
saying
la
at the
OMS
beginning of
publicó
the
la nueva edición de SHAKE, que
webinar,
la pueden
and
descargar escaneando el código
PAHO
QR,
just
en la que una de las
published the new Shake
principales o de las
edition.
principales
And here, one of the
opciones
main
de política que se toma en cuenta
policy options
son las de
taking
reformulación
into
de
account are
alimentos. Siguiente.
about
Y la próxima
reformulating
de nuevo.
foods.
Para esto, la OPS también
For this,
publicó las
PAHO
metas regionales
also
actualizadas para la
published the
reducción del sodio, que también
updated
tienen los documentos disponibles
targets
en la
for
web de la
sodium
organización,
consumption
en la que se
reduction. This is
describen
available in the PAHO
75
webpage.
categorías que caben dentro de
Here
las
we have
16 categorías
75
de alimentos,
categories of foods,
estableciendo 2 metas
establishing
para la
2
reducción del
targets
consumo de
for
sodio,
the
la reducción del
reduction of
contenido de sodio en
sodium
productos
content
procesados y
in
ultraprocesados. La
processed and
siguiente.
ultra-processed foods. Next, please.
Para este estudio de caso
So
se
for this
realizó
case
primero una
study,
revisión
we
documental con
first
toda la
did
información disponible en
a document
Colombia,
review with
que
all
llevó
information
hacia
available in
la
Colombia,
conclusión, o sea, la
which
adopción de esta normativa sobre
took
metas de
us to
contenido de
adapt
sodio,
this
en
regulation on
conjunto con el
sodium
Ministerio de
targets,
Salud
along with
y
the
la
Ministry
Oficina
of
de la
Health
OPS en el país, para
and
hacer una
the
identificación de
PAHO
actores
office in the
clave
country. We
que pudieran
identified
servir
key
como
actors
informantes para
who could
evaluar
serve as
y
informants
para
to
realizar este
assess
estudio de caso. Se
this
solicitaron
case study.
entrevistas con cada una de
We
las
asked for,
instituciones
we requested
identificadas y
interviews
que
with the
designaron
identified
a una
institutions
persona para esta
that
entrevista.
designated a person for this
Posteriormente,
interview.
se realizaron
And
entrevistas
then we
semiestructuradas
had
virtuales.
semi-structured
Estas entrevistas
virtual
fueron
interviews,
grabadas y
and these interviews
posteriormente
were
las transcripciones
recorded, and
se
then the
revisaron por parte
transcriptions
de
were
los
reviewed
informantes y fueron
by
codificadas
informants, and
para
they were
obtener
codified to
lecciones
obtain
aprendidas y mejores
learned
prácticas en el
lessons
desarrollo
and
de las
best
metas de
practices
consumo en
in the
Colombia.
development
Siguiente.
of sodium targets in Colombia.
Este proceso
This
se
process
realizó para hacer un análisis del ciclo de
was
políticas
carried out
que
to
se
analyze a policy
describe
cycle
en
in
varios
which
pasos.
we can,
Primero, el
in which
establecimiento
we
de la
have several
agenda, cómo fue el proceso de formulación de la
steps:
política,
establishing the agenda, the
adopción, de
formulation of the
implementación y
policy,
evaluación.
adoption,
Siguiente.
implementation, and assessment. Next, please.
Bien, entonces durante este proceso se
So
identificaron
during this
17 actores
process,
claves,
we
5 de la
identified
agencia de
17
gobierno,
key
5 del sector
players,
privado, 4 de
5
sociedad
from
civil,
government
2 de la
agencies, from
academia
the
y 2 de
private
los medios de
sector, from some civil
comunicación.
society, from the
De las
academia,
invitaciones se
from
obtuvo
the media.
29,5% de respuestas positivas a
We
quienes se les
obtained
realizó la entrevista
29.5 positive
semiestructurada y esto resultó en
responses, and
6
so we
actores
applied to this
entrevistados,
group
3 de agencias de gobierno, 1 del sector
semi-structured
privado y
interviews,
2 de la sociedad civil.
which
Siguiente.
allowed to obtain 6 interviewed players, 1 from the private sector and 2 from civil society.
Entonces, a continuación les describiré algunos de los
Now I'm
resultados
going to
encontrados en
talk
el
about
que
some
prefiero
of
el
the
establecimiento de la
results that
agenda y
we
como
found
marcan las mejores
regarding the
prácticas y
establishment of the
recomendaciones de la
agenda, the best
OMS para el
practices,
establecimiento de este tipo de
and
políticas.
recommendations of PAHO to
Las metas
establish
de
these kinds of
reducción de contenido de sodio en
policies.
Colombia cuentan con un
The
amplio respaldo, como
targets
también
to
Pamela lo
reduce
mencionó en su
content,
presentación. Hay
sodium
una
content in
ley en el
Colombia have
2009 que
a
declara las
lot of backup.
enfermedades
There's a
reducibles como prioridad.
law in
Hay una
2009
iniciativa
that
regional de la
declared
OPS para la
non-communicable
prevención de las
diseases as a
enfermedades
public health
transmisibles a través de la
priority.
reducción
Then
del
in
consumo de sodio.
2011, there's a PAHO
Luego, la
initiative
estrategia
to
de reducción
prevent non-communicable diseases. Then we have the sodium reduction strategy mentioned by Pamela in her presentation. And finally, the National Health Plan published in 2012. All of this was part of, and then we have the 10-year health plan. Regarding policy formulation, and as Pamela mentioned, she described very clearly that the government developed intersectorial technical discussion tables with the industry to develop these targets. Then in 2019, they established a proposal for target 1 and target 2. The World Trade Organization was notified, and there was a national public consultation, and the normative impact analysis was published in 2019, and the advocacy concept was received in 2020, and the state established if this policy was recommendable to be adopted and then implemented. The government decided that this policy should be implemented through a resolution from the Ministry of Health, as Pamela was saying. We established maximum sodium contents in prioritized foods. And the resolution from 2019-2020 has 20 food categories, and they are very aligned with the regional targets of PAHO or with the WHO thresholds. In 2023, Resolution 2056 modified some maximum limits and procedures to assess. Next, please, to finish. And regarding the adoption, implementation, and then assessment of the policy, we can one of the findings are that it's a mandatory application policy. The development and application of this policy was led by the government and different agencies in the state. It has a large application span. Actually, today it is one of the most comprehensive policies in terms of the number of categories it includes. It is based on national and regional evidence, as Pamela said. A public consultation was carried out at a national and international level, and it also included gradual adoption terms to allow the industry to adapt to this regulation. Next, please.
Una antes. Gracias. And
just some preliminary conclusions that are very general. The development, adoption, and implementation process for these targets regarding sodium Colombia follow the best practices, and it also complied with national established regulations. One of the weaknesses is that there was not much involvement from civil society, and other processes must include more civil society and the academia. And it is also necessary to establish mechanisms to protect regulatory processes from industry interference that created some modifications in maximum limits in terms of sodium content. Thank you very much, Leslie, and I leave it to you. And thank you very much to everyone for your attention.
Muchas gracias, Luis.
Thank you very much, Luis.
Regreso mi computador con cerró completamente, pero ahora tengo mi móvil conectado en todo
my
caso.
computer closed, but I have my mobile connected. We thank everyone for your attention, and now we will have the last panel in our webinar that will speak about the support from civil society and the civil society's perspective and their support in terms of implementing the initiatives and interventions to reduce sodium consumption. And for this, I will give the floor to the moderator of this panel, Sofia Gallardo Patiño, from Global Health Advocacy Incubator. Please go ahead, Sofia. Hello to everyone. It is a pleasure to participate in this panel, and throughout this webinar, we have analyzed different cost-effective sodium policies from technical rigor, monitoring, inspection, the importance of social marketing, and exemplary progress from our colleagues in Colombia. So it looks like we know what to do. However, today in this panel, I think that we are asking why. Why? If the evidence is so clear, why are the policies, what do policies are implemented in so much time? How can sodium targets be a non-negotiable priority and a political priority in the countries? And how do we protect these policies from industry interference? And the answer is not just one answer, but today I will talk about advocacy and civil society. And for this, we're going to listen to three voices in three different countries. And I would like to see if our panelists can open their cameras. We have Nidia Amador from Costa Rica Saludable, Ms. Gonzalez from the Community of Family Sciences, and Diego Rodriguez from Comis Uruguay. Thank you for being here in this panel. And I would also like to say that if the participants have any questions during this conversation, please write them in the chat, and I'm going to try to integrate them into the conversation. Okay, so to start with, I would like for each of you to comment briefly on the work that has been done to support the development, the adoption, and the implementation of sodium targets in your countries. Nidia.
Muchas gracias. Sí, desde Costa Rica
Thank you very
Saludable,
much.
nosotros
At Costa Rica
tomamos la
Saludable,
evidencia local
we
y
take
evidencia
local
técnica
evidence
como un
and technical
puente,
evidence
como un
as a
motor
bridge,
para unir
as a
todo
moat,
lo que
or
la
as an
academia nos
engine
produce
to
y los
link everything
decisores
that
políticos que realizan sus
academia
insumos.
produces
Hemos
with
hecho
the
alianzas
public decision
estratégicas
makers and then
con otras
provide them with those
organizaciones.
inputs. We
Formamos
have
una red con
strategic
apoyo de
alliances with
OPS
8 organizations. We
y
have a network
estamos
with the
también
support of
formando un
PAHO.
grupo juvenil
And we're also
para irlo
forming a youth
introduciendo y
group
necesitamos
to
el recambio de
introduce
las
this.
organizaciones
And
de
we need
personas
change in
como nosotros
organizations
que
of
tenemos
people like
añitos.
us
Y por
that
otro lado, la
are a little bit
vigilancia de procesos
older.
legislativos
And
como por
then the
ejemplo el
surveillance of
proyecto Ley
legislative
24
processes,
claro, que
like,
nos
for
está costando
example, the
montones, ¿verdad?
front labeling
Y
project, which is
recientemente el Ministerio
being
de
very
Salud lanzó
difficult
un
to obtain.
borrador
The Ministry
para
of Health
metas de
issued
sodio con las metas acorde a OPS y
a
algunas de
draft
ellas se les ha
for
apoyado.
sodium targets, and PAHO has
Básicamente
supported them.
es eso, ¿verdad? Lo que hemos estado
And so that's what we
trabajando
have been working
arduamente
on
como sociedad civil, estar
very
muy
hardly. And as
vigilantes
a
y
civil
sin
society,
conflicto
we
de
try to
interés
be
en todos
very
los procesos,
vigilant and
ya
to
sean
have no
legislativos o
conflict of
ejecutivos.
interest in legislative and executive projects. Thank you very much, Nydia. This is very coherent with what our colleague Luis just presented. He said that the role of civil society is very important for legislative processes, and Costa Rica is doing this in a great way. And now, Heredina. Hello. Good morning. I would like to say that I'm replacing Betty that could not attend this important event. From families, we are from family science, but we belong mainly to the healthy food movement. We have continued with the articulate work with the Ministry of Health, with the Pan American Health Organization. I don't know if we, I think the question is number two, what we have done specifically. And here I would like to say the following thing. In the actions developed in Panama, the most effective strategies have been those based on multisectorial work, technical and scientific backup, and constant advocacy. Policies move forward faster when there's coordination between public institutions, civil society, academia, and legislative actors. One of the most effective approaches has been direct technical accompaniment to decision makers and meetings with Congress people and technical advisors allowed to explain the impact of excessive sodium consumption in public health. And we could present data related to cardiovascular disease and others. This technical accompaniment helped strengthen the understanding decision makers regarding the problem. And today we have a bill of law that is going to go through first debate, and this key support that we've had from international organizations like PAHO provide us with technical legitimacy, and the use of the targets from PAHO allowed us to support technically the proposal to show that Panama was aligning with international public health recommendations, and this provides a strength in terms of credibility to develop this law, and the so that the legislative agents could support better this kind of project. In terms of prioritized players like the Ministry of Health, and also legislators and advisors who have a key role in terms of improving regulations, and the organized civil society strengthening alliances to maintain surveillance regarding the project. Population in general through sensitization activities, education activities on the risks of excessive consumption of salt, the academia and health professionals that bring scientific evidence and technical backup to regulatory proposals.
The activities we were able to develop to have a greater backup in our initiatives are technical meetings with intersectoral roundtables that allow to build consensus and solve observations before legislative debates, preparation of technical document with scientific evidence with aligned recommendations, permanent monitoring, very important before the assembly, so the process is not stagnated. Public sensitization campaigns allow us to position this issue in the public opinion and increase social support. Coordination between civil society and health authorities with a unified position. Well, Panama's experience shows, as well as in other countries, that healthy nutrition regulations requires not only technical evidence, but also political will, citizen backup, and sustained and strategic advocacy. As we can see, the most important strength we have is to build consensus, to have meetings and roundtables, to follow up legislative aspects from very close, go to our representatives and support them with technical information. This strengthens the movement, and they can understand how necessary this regulation is. Thank you very much. The work you do with civil society is so important. And from everything you said, I'd like to highlight that it's similar to what we see in theory, how important it's to coordinate technical assistance and its relevance too. And now Diego Rodriguez will talk about what they're doing in the country to implement SALT targets. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sofia, for your invitation. Thank you to PAHO. In Uruguay, we give visibility to supporting the policies. We need to have progress in our health target is reducing sodium consumption by 40% in the population. To do so, we understand that countries have to generate their own strategies that are evidence-based and also based on international recommendations. Civil society always follows recommendations and have governments follow PAHO recommendations. In this case, our reference is PAHO targets. This week, we generated press publication and also went on the street to generate awareness. So the households know about this, but also the industry realizes that the civil society is supporting all these policies, because if this policy does not advance, it's because of vested interests behind. So civil society needs to help governments in making the right decisions. Thank you very much, Diego. And we'll go in depth on this last aspect you dealt with, which is very relevant, how to protect governments in terms of industry attacks. Nidia from Costa Rica will tell us about what specific advocacy actions have been the engine to foster sodium targets and other healthy food regulations. We have a network to prevent non-communicable diseases. We are 40 different organizations, and there's a smaller network for the project the Ministry of Health has concerning sodium targets with the academia, professional associations in Cienza, an institute that belongs to the Ministry of Health, who has done all the consumption studies with the foods with the highest content of sodium, is what we are supported by. We also had a consultation in a survey organized by the Ministry of Health that is evidence-based, of course, as it should be. And on the 20th this month, PAHO in Cienza and us will organize a webinar to give transparency to this process. The industry will say, oh, we don't know how sodium was calculated, and we will explain how that happened based upon the PAHO sodium targets. A very important thing is being present in forums where we are invited or not. We go with our ads and everything to foster bills when they're in the assembly. And in this case, it's an executive branch regulation. So we are coordinating with the Ministry of Health about fostering and supporting. There is a situation, we just changed government with new health authorities. So we sent a letter already to the new Minister of Health, so he starts listening to this kind of initiative and start supporting it. Thank you very much, Nidia. I repeat that it's very important to have networks. All these institutions make efforts to mobilize and sensitize the entire population to support an evidence-based bill, fundamental. Thank you very much, and congratulations from your efforts from Costa Rica. Diego, the last aspect to go in depth in. What are your local actions in Uruguay at AMIS to counteract the interference of the food industry in adopting regulatory policies? Well, as I was saying, based upon this conception that the industry does not progress in, does not allow for progress in policies, we counteract their discourse. Once a politician told me that they make decisions because of three situations, because they don't know, as Nidia said, they go and counteract with the industry by speaking with legislators. The industry always does lobbying and tells governments not to take measures. They say that unemployment will increase, product price will increase. They have different discourses and say that people are responsible for consumption and it's not necessary to regulate, but to educate. In that regard, we show that that's not the case. We show evidence that is generated and free from conflicts of interest, and we go to authorities and governments to remove this concept of, oh, I didn't know. Also, they didn't want to implement it or they couldn't implement it. And we need to know why that's happening and how that situation can be unblocked. Our shield against that industry interference in Uruguay led us to two actions. We record all industry actions. Coca-Cola, for example, in all countries tries to intervene and show they're socially responsible. PepsiCo does the same thing. They say they collaborate with the environment, with the workforce. They say they collaborate with the environment, but they are the main plastic polluters. That's part of what the industry does to improve their image in front of governments and populations. So we expose those situations, greenwashing, graywashing, the associations of governments and these companies. We warn that that's not okay and that we don't want to see it repeated. Also, industries finance congresses. We'll have a nutrition congress at a private university in Uruguay that is financed by the industry. Researchers, one in particular was the son of ultra-processed foods owners. He had a clear conflict of interest. He said we could not demonize products. And we visibilize that from the civil society, particularly OMIS Uruguay. But we also generate tools for professionals who want to be free from conflicts of interest and value their position. Ignacio from the Sanar Foundation in Argentina said, those who have conflicts of interest never have consequences, and those who do not have conflicts of interest do have consequences because we are not invited to congresses that the industry finances. But those who have conflicts of interest do not have consequences. We have to change that situation. We have to value professionals, people, authorities who have no conflicts of interest. And we're generating tools to do so. We are generating tools to expose these non-conflict situations, but also to train students and professionals to understand what is a conflict of interest. Oftentimes we talk about conflicts of interest and we don't know we are having conflicts of interest. We're trying to prepare all this together with universities to generate awareness about this. Those who make decisions need to be clear about their framework and that all these conflicts of interests are part of commercial determinants. And these are our actions concerning interference of industry. Thank you very much, Diego. I'll highlight a very important phrase to listen from other lectures about this. You said it's important to know that the civil society is a shield in connection with evidence-based policies and conflicts of interest. Nadia and Irina, please close and tell us what is being done in Costa Rica and Panama, a concrete action or two actions to protect these policies, as our friend from Uruguay mentioned. One is to be ahead industry opposition. They say, we don't know how they calculate sodium targets. We are having our webinar and inviting them so they know. And also commercial determinants of health. FOPL is a tool to guarantee health and information for consumers. On the other hand, we have social legitimacy because we represent important groups in the population. And we have no conflicts of interest. Those are the things we do. An example, we just realized that a university, a state-owned university, will do a nutrition congress, and one of their sponsors is Nestle. We sent a letter of concern, and we want to make this public. We'll have conflicts with that university, which provides lots of support to us. It's the Association of Nutritionists, actually, not the university. We are trying to build evidence so these situations do not occur again. Heredina, please. Same thing here in Panama. We have very much underlined the importance of transparency. We have told the industry that they cannot deceive consumers. We are all consumers, and the rights of consumers are universal, and we can't have anything above that. In Panama, we have a law that points that out. One of the rights is the right to safety. A product is not safe when it can cause potential damage to health, and that's the case of sodium limits in processed and ultra-processed foods. There, we have sat with the industry in round tables showing evidence of this and showing them that they are above limits in what refers to rights and right to information. Some point out if they have sodium in their ingredients, others not. We do this permanent work, and they are always looking at what we are doing, and we are also looking at what they are doing. We don't leave aside what happens with them. And we need to strengthen information and provide technical support to legislators so they are stronger when there are debates. They always want to be at the same level. The industry always says that the people just need to be educated, but we don't have resources to do that. So we are at a disadvantage in terms of consumers and providers because information asymmetry is not the same. Providers know their products very well, but what do consumers know? We want to say that it's very important to abide by the regulation and have transparent information. They should not deceive the population. There's a lot of pressure, but thanks to our technical evidence, we demonstrate the need for this law. Thank you very much, Heredina. We are running out of time, but I'd like to highlight the importance of what Diego and Heredina just mentioned. It's important to monitor and evidence these actions that put at risk cost-effective policies that are evidence-based. I thank the three panelists for their thoughts. I'd like to thank PAHO for the invitation to this forum. And it's clear today that technical evidence is indispensable, essential, and evidence is the engine to push these policies. In our organization, we firmly believe in civil society actions, and let's continue with our efforts to reduce consumption of sodium in the Americas. Thank you very much, Sophia. Thank you very much to you all for extending your time a little bit. Thanks for being with us today here. Thank you for being able to share all the evidence we have concerning how much sodium impacts health negatively. The presence of this nutrient is made available and reaches our homes and stomachs that has to be regulated. We shouldn't have excess of this nutrient in our foods, and we need to discuss policies and governance to adopt effective policies, as was just mentioned, but also to make sure that once these policies are adopted, they have to be implemented, monitored, and controlled effectively, making sure that these processes and the policy cycle is protected against the interference of players who defend corporate interests instead of public health interests. So PAHO and WHO very much thank you for your participation, and not only for this week. This week is there to remind us and celebrate Progress May, but also we need to make more progress in policy design, implementation, and protection of policy cycles without interference. So I thank you very much, and we say goodbye now. Thank you very much.